Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I can just go ahead with the second reader. Madam Speaker, I was saying
Well, before, I don't know if you wish, you started to address what the leader of the opposition had indicated. I think that's where we cut off. So it may be just best that you continue along that line, explaining what you were.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I was just making the point just for the benefit mainly of the public, so persons understand that the standing orders allows a minimum of 4 days between first and second and third reading. So we have far surpassed the 4 days. Madam Speaker, I think the general concept is, of course, when you give a first reading, you have to give the public some time to be able to digest the bill, look at it, raise concerns if they have to, which actually happened, Madam Speaker. Persons made contact with the ministry, the Immigration Department, Attorney General's chambers, and as a result of that, those changes will come to committee. But Madam Speaker, as we know as well, when we have urgent matters, we would even do first, second, and third reading on the same day. Yeah, so it's not a challenge to have it in the same sitting, but customarily, Madam Speaker, we would ask for Standing Order 52 to be waived. But there's no need to waive it today because we have surpassed the 4 days. So just for the benefit of the public, Madam Speaker, but I thank the Leader of the Opposition. I think he's doing his job in raising it. Madam Speaker, I move that the bill shortly entitled Immigration and Passport Amendment Bill 2025 be read a second time. Madam Speaker, I stand to address a piece of a wider matter that is of great importance to our territory: immigration reform. As we continue to grow and develop as a territory, it is essential that we have a fair, efficient, and effective system in place to manage the flow of persons seeking to make our territory their home. Nearly 2.5 years ago, we embarked on a review of our immigration laws and policies regarding resident status and belonger status, with the goal of creating a more inclusive and cohesive system. This process was guided by the recommendations of the Commission of Inquiry and the Independent Reviewer's Report, which collectively highlighted the need for general immigration reform, but more importantly, in our residence and belonger status regime. Since then, we have made significant progress, including the passage of the Immigration and Passport Amendment Act 2024. This legislation marked an important step forward in our efforts to modernize our immigration laws and bring them in line with the needs of our community. Today, we take another step in the right direction with the introduction of the Immigration and Passport Amendment Bill 2025. This bill builds on the progress we have made in 2024 and addresses several key areas that require attention. For example, we are clarifying the definition of ordinarily resident to ensure that it is applied consistently throughout the Immigration and Passport Act. We are also clarifying recently introduced requirements for attaining belonger status, which will help to ensure that those who seek to become a part of our territory are truly committed to the territory and its people. Additional consequential amendments have also been made to tidy areas of the Act that would have been unintended ramifications. As we move forward with this reform, our goal is to create a system that is fair, transparent, and responsive to the needs of all members of our territory, even those not currently seeking permanent status but who live amongst us. We want to ensure that those who want to be a permanent part of us show their love for our culture and understanding of our history and heritage, commitment to the advancement of the territory, integration into our communities, have good character, and can contribute positively to our economy. As the world grapples with shifting migration patterns, it is more important than ever that we remain steadfast in our commitment to the well-being and security of our territory. We have recognized that our immigration procedures and systems must be designed to protect the interests of our territory and its people. That is why we are committed to putting in place the necessary safeguards to prevent abuse and to ensure that those who seek to remain are genuinely committed to our values. This cannot happen without continuous transformation and reform that is rooted in the adoption of cultural and economic considerations, coupled with the application of industry standards and best practices. Madam Speaker, as Premier and Minister of Immigration, I am committed to ensuring that our immigration system is robust, efficient, and just. We must strike a delicate balance between protecting the rights and interests of our existing residents and creating opportunities for those who wish to join our territory. I am confident that with the passage of this bill and the amendments to the regulations, we will be taking a major step forward in our efforts to create a fair, robust, efficient, and effective immigration system that strikes the right balance. I urge all members of this House to support the bill and to work with us to build a brighter future for our territory and its people. Only together we can create a system that truly is in the best interests of the Virgin Islands and its residents. In addition to that statement, Madam Speaker, the objects and the reasons of the bill I think are short enough so that I can just read through them quickly. Of course, the Clause 1 deals with the short title and commencement. Clause 2 deals with the definition of ordinary resident that we spoke about earlier. Clause 3 would provide for the amendment of Section 5 of the Principal Act by introducing new provisions to address the matter of medical reimbursements and payment of funeral expenses for immigration officers who are categorized as risk officers, and to bring the provision in line with public services allowances schedule. Madam Speaker, just to say, of course, you have like the police and perhaps some other public officers who have their medical bills taken care of course, and I think it's important that we do that for immigration and also for customs. They get some of the same rights and privileges. Clause 4 would provide for amendment of Section 13 of the Principal Act to clarify the qualifications of members of the Board of Immigration. And just for emphasis, Madam Speaker, when we were here before, we made some amendments in committee that had unintended consequences. One unintended consequence was only persons who had been granted status through Section 16 of the Immigration and Passport Act would be able to be a part of the board. And of course, you have many persons who are belongers by descent who would have been excluded. That was an unintended consequence, Madam Speaker. Clause 5 would provide for amendment of Section 16 of the Principal Act by reverting to the original period for which a person is considered as being ordinarily resident in the territory, that is to say 10 years. The amendment to Section 16 is proposed because the Immigration and Passport Amendment Act 2024 had the unintended consequence of lengthening the period of being ordinarily resident in the territory for belonger status for an effective 30 years, 10-year qualifying period under Section 18 of the Principal Act, an additional 20 years under Section 16 of the Principal Act. So that was another unintended consequence of amendment we made in committee to that Amendment Act. Clause 6 would provide for amendment of Section 18 of the Principal Act to include Act to A, include paragraph B of the Principal Act, which was deleted by implication in error. B, to distinguish the term ordinarily resident for the purposes of Section 18 from the term in Section 16, and to provide justification for revocation of a certificate of residence under Section 19 of the Principal Act. Clause 7 would provide for the amendment of Section 20 to address a consequential amendment arising from the Immigration and Passport Amendment Act 2024. Clause 8 would provide for amendment of Section 23 to address consequential amendments arising from the Immigration and Passport Amendment Act 2024, and to reduce the period for persons seeking leave to remain in the territory, irrespective of whether they held a non-belanger landholding license or not, by reverting to the original period, namely 6 months, and to prescribe the period for which a person who holds a valid non-belanger landholding license can remain in the territory. Clause 9 would provide for the amendment of the Principal Act by introducing a new provision which penalizes an employer who facilitates the commission of an offense. Clause 10 would provide for amendment of Section 30 to penalize an employer who facilitates the commission of an offense. Clause 11 would provide for amendment of Section 31 to provide for the transition of an individual from gainful employment to a dependent, and to issue a conditional permit to a spouse of a Virgin Islander or belanger upon meeting a 3-month period. Clause 12 would provide for amendment of Section 45 to empower the Cabinet to make regulations prescribing the procedure for obtaining permission to remain in the territory under Section 18(4)(b) of the Principal Act, and which relates to children who have attained 18 years. Madam Speaker, those are the objects and reasons. Madam Speaker, in addition to that, I just want to say a few more words on what it is we're seeking to do as it pertains to immigration reform, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, just before I say that, I just wanted to, of course, recognize the Easter celebrations that we just had, Madam Speaker, and of course, I hope everybody had a wonderful Easter and a reflective Easter, reflecting on the sacrifice of Jesus Christ and all that He's done for us, and to reflect that level of a sacrifice in our own lives and that level of rebirth in our own lives as we seek to become better people, a better community, and a better territory. Madam Speaker, I'm serious about that. Even what we do in this House, it should be driven by a desire to be better as people. Let division die. Let division die. Let contempt, hatred, all of those things which make our community a weaker community, let those things die, and let God's love live. Live in our hearts, live through our words, through our actions, through our intentions, even here in this Honorable House, even with the legislation that we seek to pass. And we have legislation here that deals with an extremely sensitive topic. Extremely sensitive topic. And Madam Speaker, even as we speak about it, we should speak about it with care. Handle it carefully, because you're not sure who you might offend, Madam Speaker. And we should be very careful that we are gentle and easy, but we also have to make sure, Madam Speaker, that we are not afraid to have a conversation. We have to be mature enough and responsible to have a conversation in such a way that we are able to forge that common identity that we're speaking about, and that we're all on the same page and we're working in unison, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I also want to, of course, acknowledge the death of the Pope, who, of course, almost symbolically passed after the Easter holidays, or the holiest period of the Christian calendar. And of course, extend my condolences to all those persons who are followers of the Catholic tradition. And there's so many other things worth mentioning, Madam Speaker, that we'll have to get into at the appropriate time. But Madam Speaker, we have to have a conversation about immigration reform. Coincidentally, a topic that the Pope was strong on in terms of how Donald Trump's immigration policies were impacting persons in America. But we have to have that conversation, Madam Speaker, because our goal is to build a sustainable nation. And you cannot build a sustainable nation without creating a shared sense of identity. You cannot create a sustainable nation without a concept called patriotism. A nation without patriotism is a weak nation. And we must not confuse patriotism and nationalism. In nationalism, you just, of course, almost locked in conflict based on national identity. Patriotism is when we have accepted the responsibility to safeguard the best interests of a people and of a nation. We have accepted that responsibility. And Madam Speaker, just because you have received a certificate, it doesn't mean that you're a patriot. Just because you have been born on the soil, it doesn't mean that you're a patriot. Just because you have ancestry here doesn't mean that you're a patriot. Patriotism is something that the community and the nation and the leaders of that nation have to encourage. They have to put the mechanisms in place to build a spirit of patriotism and to build a shared identity. And if you don't do that, Madam Speaker, you weaken the nation. Madam Speaker, I want to wish the Honorable Kairaima happy birthday. Honorable Kairaima has celebrated his birthday today, Madam Speaker. Don't look at me in that tone of voice.
What made him so special?
Madam Speaker, the Honorable Kairaima shares a birthday with Miss Esme Stout. This is a smart gentleman over here. Everybody else was confused, but he wasn't confused at all. Honorable Kairaima shares a birthday with a lady, a very virtuous lady. A lady who we had the pleasure of visiting this morning. She made her 100th birthday. And she is a product of the Virgin Islands. She would have been born in 1925. She passed through a very different a change in times in the Virgin Islands from the 1920s up until now, Madam Speaker. She would have grown up in a time when she have to shift cow and goat, and she would have had to make coal for the coal pot. She would have had to go to the well, and she would have had to do all of these things, Madam Speaker. She would have to pass through hurricanes, and she would have had to pass through the changing of the economy. Yeah, all of that, Madam Speaker. She is a product of the Virgin Islands. She is an example of the identity of a Virgin Islander. And that is the foundation for the rest of us, Madam Speaker, who are here. Whether you have ancestry here or not, the foundation of the Virgin Islands are those 5,000 to 6,000 persons who remained here after slavery. We here in the Virgin Islands are nothing more than a collection of different families. You have that family in Ballast Bay, but we have communities all over the Virgin Islands with a similar story to what has taken place in Ballast Bay. And it's a beautiful story. It's the Virgin Islands story. It's a story of resilience. It's a story of determination. It's a story of a God-fearing people who overcame challenges and grew and walked towards a prosperous society. Now, important to note, Madam Speaker, the Virgin Islands story doesn't remain the same. Just like those early days when Miss Muddy came up were different from today, the Virgin Islands story grows and evolves. And everybody comes into the Virgin Islands story from a different place. And now you have persons who are inviting into that Virgin Islands story from other places in the world. But they have their own Virgin Islands story now. But it's important that those who come from wherever they come from, and even the younger ones in the younger generation, are able to appreciate the sacrifice, appreciate that which came before, appreciate the trajectory that we are on as a people, and not take us off course from that trajectory, but to help to enhance that trajectory so that we can move forward into the future united together. Madam Speaker, our immigration process before was not adequate to ensure that that process took place. But thankfully, the Virgin Islands was a place, a small place, small population. And you have persons who came from other places, and because they were small in number, and the Virgin Islanders were a majority, they were able to be grafted in, so to speak. We graft them in, and they become a part of the family. Maybe they married in to a Virgin Islands family. Maybe it was just the community that they grew up in, and all the people who their neighbors and the families of their neighbors took them under the wing, accepted them as their own, and they became grafted in, and they developed the identity. It could have been that they came up through the school system with us, and when we went to school, we didn't know who had ancestry from who didn't have ancestry. They went to school with us, and they became our best friends. And they became grafted in to that identity. But Madam Speaker, what happened over time is as the numbers grew and increased, it becomes more difficult to graft in. And the process doesn't necessarily happen so naturally or organically. So as a society, we have to put measures in place to ensure it takes place, Madam Speaker. We have to put things in the school system to make sure it takes place. Madam Speaker, one of the most damaging things that we could have done in the school system is like when you have Commonwealth Day and you have everybody coming in, you know, their ancestry is from St. Kitts, their ancestry is from Dominica, their ancestry is from here, there, and everywhere. Instead of emphasizing to all the children, regardless of their ancestry, that what it is we are seeking to do is forge a common identity. And that school system is so important in forging that common identity. All our institutions in our community, our churches, everything. What we want to do is create a common identity, because what will happen, Madam Speaker, is if you don't create a common identity, you can be locked in conflict for generations. I can give you several examples. You go to the Middle East, you have persons who decide, one decide them is Shiite, the other decide they're Sunni. And they see themselves as different, and they become locked in conflict for generations. You might go to a Guyana or some place like that, and then you see that they have conflicts between those who see themselves as Indian and those who see themselves as Indian and Africa. Or you could go even to places like the United States. This person is from the inner part of the United States, the heartland, and the other person's from the coast. Or them is city people and they're country people. The point is, Madam Speaker, if you are building a community and there are factions in the community who don't see themselves in each other, you have a problem. You have a problem. And so it can easily be with those who have joined us from other places. And if you don't see yourself in each other, you won't necessarily work to safeguard the interests of that person. And that becomes dangerous. You might get a belonger certificate that extends to you certain rights and privileges like the first preference for employment. And then we put you in an HR position. And all of a sudden, all the people who are being employed are from the same place that you had ancestry. Yeah? Your background is from the Dominican Republic. All of a sudden, only people getting jobs now from the Dominican Republic. Those things are dangerous. Those things create conflict in a community. And as I said before, you might have had a flag before, but you get a new flag. And you have to safeguard that flag. You have to safeguard the interests of that people. You have to be a patriot. What we were doing before is just saying you've been here for a certain amount of time and you get the rights and the privileges. What we are saying with this immigration reform is no, you have to demonstrate a certain level of commitment. You have to demonstrate a certain level of patriotism in order to get those privileges and those benefits. Yes, some of us are born with the privileges and the benefits, not on the basis of being born here. not on the benefit, on the basis of anything that we have done for ourselves. Our ancestors have given those to us based on their service and their work. It's nothing that I have done as an individual that makes me qualified for the benefits and the privileges of being a Virgin Islander. It is all because of what my ancestors did, the work that they put in. That's why I have it today. Sometimes we're in a rush for it. Sometimes persons get here and they're in a rush to get what you have. But those rights and privileges, somebody have to pay their dues to get it, Madam Speaker. And as a result of the sacrifice of those who came here, even those who came here very early, maybe some of those who came here in the 50s and the 60s, whether they came here as a school teacher, whether they came here and they were working for cable and wireless or whatever it is they were doing, their children are able to get the benefit based on what they did, what they contributed. And let me say as well, Madam Speaker, patriotism is measured in service. Patriotism is measured in service. And there is a service that you get paid for, which we appreciate. But the even more powerful example is the service that you are not paid for. The service that you are not paid for. So, Madam Speaker, I say all of that to say that this immigration reform that we are undertaking, there may be some persons who won't like it. There may be some persons who I think we're making it more difficult for them. Madam Speaker, we have to do what is right and in the best interest of the Virgin Islands. Madam Speaker, it's ironic that we're having this discussion now because it might have been, was it last week or the week before? I went on the news media, and we have to be careful with this news media, Madam Speaker. There's some particular news sites, and it seems like their only purpose is to sow seeds of division and discord. And then they got some people who just get on those comments. And I suspect a lot of them are written by the same person or a small group of people. And their only intention is to sow seeds of discord for their own best interests. And the reason why they do it is because they believe if they express a view and opinion a few times, and it seems like a majority or popular opinion, it will influence the thinking of others. A very kind of toxic type of behavior. And all of a sudden now you have persons who probably didn't even listen to the debate in the House. But they're being poisoned with perspectives that sow seeds of division. I see that on the news media. Some persons were calling Honorable Skelton a xenophobe. And Madam Speaker, I know Honorable Skelton and his family well enough to know he's far from a xenophobe. And perhaps the same persons who would call him a xenophobe would call me a xenophobe. Madam Speaker, Honorable Skelton, myself, or any other patriotic Virgin Islander, we are not xenophobes. We're just patriots. I will say, Madam Speaker, that if we are not careful, we can have some xenophobic views which take root in our society because we are not managing immigration reform in a mature way. But what some persons recognize as xenophobia is an effort to safeguard the interests of the Virgin Islands people. And that is a process that I invite persons who do not have ancestry to not only understand but embrace. Because while those, what I would consider patriotic views might prevent somebody who is not a belonger from getting an opportunity perhaps that they might resent in some way. When those individuals become belongers and they have children in the territory and grandchildren in the territory, it's those same views that will protect those children and grandchildren and safeguard their interests. Make sure their interests are safeguarded. And our interests need to be safeguarded more than ever with technology, with the ease of travel, with the building of our economy. We are building an economy where we are inviting people from elsewhere to invest in the BVI, to walk in the BVI, and live in the BVI. But if we don't safeguard the interests of our children, they will be left behind and they'll be watching everything happen around them. They'll just be on the corners, sitting down and watching everybody else benefit from the BVI except for them. And patriotism is not just giving them opportunities that they're not ready for. Patriotism will making sure that they're trained and they're qualified so that when they get those opportunities, they make us all proud. But somebody who's not committed to the interests of the Virgin Islander will just say, oh, that person is not qualified, let's bypass them. But we'll say to that person, look, this person just needs a little assistance and a little help and they can get there. So here what? They're going to understudy that person who you have there for a few years and then they're going to take the opportunity. Some people wouldn't like it, but we are here to safeguard the interests of the Virgin Islands and the Virgin Islands people. We had I am a respectful person, and I don't mean to degrade or demean anyone. But I'll just give you an example, Madam Speaker. We had a lady come down here and became assistant commissioner. She became the assistant commissioner, Madam Speaker. Yeah, the position was actually created for her. And then we had two persons who were deputy commissioners, Jackie Vanterpool and Sinclair Amri. And Jackie Vanterpool and Sinclair Amri have been trained to take up leadership positions in the Royal Virgin Islands Police Force. And then you had an assistant commissioner here who came. And this assistant commissioner, from the time she came, was given many more training opportunities than those deputy commissioners. Every training she was on, I don't blame her for trying to build herself and building her resume and her qualifications. But now she is gone. And what has that benefited the Virgin Islands? Wouldn't it have been better to invest in persons who have a stake, who they live here, they're not going anywhere, they're not going to take the qualifications and leave with it to get another job and look for another position? We have commissioners coming here every 3 years, and then they leave and they go with their experience. What does that benefit the Virgin Islands? So the patriotism, the shared identity and the shared destiny should cause all of us to say, look, let us invest in our people. Let's give them the opportunities. Let's give them the training. Let's create an example so that when those children who are in the school, that they can look and see, look, I can be the commissioner of police. I can be the chief immigration officer. I can be the commissioner of customs. The law enforcement review here is telling you, well, you know, you need to bring in some more expatriates. You know, the customs immigration, they have way too many locals. That's what law enforcement review is telling us. We need some talent from the outside. If we are to safeguard the interests of the Virgin Islands and the Virgin Islands people, we must invest in our people. We must protect them. Not protect them by stifling them. We must challenge them to be their best. We must challenge them to be their best. We must put the institutions and the resources in place for them to be their best. Then we must make sure that they receive the opportunities. We are not there as yet, Madam Speaker. Some of these things we would just do almost like a code. It's a code you wouldn't even have to speak. But now it's important to codify it. That's why we're saying, if you want to get some belonger status, you have to demonstrate your commitment. You got to be doing some kind of work here besides your job. Whether through your church, whether through your community. You got to be doing some kind of cleanup campaign, some kind of environmental stewardship, something. Don't just think you're going to be here just for a few years and then all the rights and privileges are bequeathed to you. No, it's not going to work like that anymore. And guess what? You're going to be better for it. And then when the next group comes around, you're going to uphold the benefits of that process. Madam Speaker, there's a lot more I can say about the particular topic, but perhaps I'll leave it there and allow others an opportunity, recognizing that I usually have 2 bites at the apple in my wrap-up. So I'll leave it there, but this is what we are attempting to do, Madam Speaker. And I have to say as well, the labor reform is coming as well. It is coming. So prepare yourselves for it. We have to look after the interests of our people. And we also have to have a process, a clear process, by which people can become a part of that tradition, a part of that legacy that we are committed to preserving and protecting. Legacy that has been established by our foreparents, by the Esme Stouts of the world, by the Francis Letsums of the world, by the Alexandrina Madurus of the world, by the Willard Wheatleys of the world, and the Lavity Stouts of the world, and the Ralph O'Neills of the world, by the North Iris O'Neills of the world, by the Real Georges of the world, the Albert Shinneries of the world. They gave it to us. They built the Virgin Islands, and we cannot allow now to give it away and to let their sacrifices be wasted. Madam Speaker, I thank you.
Madam Speaker, I rise to second the motion that's before us. And Madam Speaker, if you would permit me, I'd like to preface my portion of the debate by just saying that this morning I must have been awake. I certainly wasn't out of bed when I received a message telling me that Judith Nibbs had passed, my constituents. And I'd like to extend condolence to the family, Madam Speaker. And knowing that I wasn't coming to the House before 1 o'clock, I was still in bed when I got a message saying the Pope passed. As the Premier has stated, Madam Speaker, he has extended condolences to all those who have followed the Pope as Catholics. And the Catholic Church is something that no one in the Western world can get away from. I wouldn't say why, but that's a fact. Madam Speaker, the piece of legislation before us, it's not intended to affect me or benefit me in any way, myself and others like myself. We will be talking strictly, Madam Speaker, about people who are in the territory with status such as belongerships and residency, and those who are simply on time, what we call time. But Madam Speaker, I wonder if you look at places like the United States, about 250 or a little under or over years old, how many times do they amend their Immigration Act, Immigration and Passport Act, that impacts the status of people? We are not in a good place, Madam Speaker, when every so often you have to come and make amendments to legislation that impacts the status of people. We have the British Nationality Act, which we have no control of, Madam Speaker. It is a thing that I remember, Madam Speaker, when I was a kid, I was a British subject citizen of the United Kingdom. And it keeps evolving into all kinds of things, my status. If you ask me what my status is right now, vis-a-vis the Virgin Islands and the United Kingdom. All I could tell you is if I'm walking around with one passport, I'm a UK citizen. If I'm walking around with another passport, I'm a citizen, overseas territory citizen. British overseas, BOTC, British overseas territory citizen. And I can prove the difference, Madam Speaker. I can prove it because if I go to the United Kingdom with my OT passport, I'm subject to immigration control. If I go there with the UK passport, I'm not. So sometimes you ask yourself, who are you? And here's the Premier bringing a bill before us regarding the immigration and passport amendment. So even in Tortola, sometimes you have to ask yourself the question, who are you? A lady came to me irate, Madam Speaker, irate, because she went to the elections office to get a voter registration card. And they told her that she has to prove that she's a belonger. Now this is a lady who I didn't go to school with her, but she was in school at the same time I was in school. So that puts you back a long way, Madam Speaker, about 70 years. She lived up the road from me. Stone's throw. And telling her that she has to prove that she's a belonger. And you could only imagine. Now, the question I have, Madam Speaker, is what's the relationship between the elections office and belongership? What's the relationship? There is a relationship, Madam Speaker. And that relationship was established in 2007. It was established in 2007. So you would know that this lady had been registered to vote and been voting before 2007. And therefore, Madam Speaker, she didn't have to prove that she was a belonger in order to vote. But now that belongers can vote, everyone is tied to belongership. And she understandably take offense to that. So I called the the elections office, Madam Speaker, and had a conversation with the supervisor of election. The supervisor of election is someone I haven't met yet, Madam Speaker. I think that being elected officials, it would be nice if you would bring her by for a nice introduction, whether here or someplace down at the House of Assembly offices. And we had the conversation, and she started to explain to me the whole story. So I had to go back and took her back to where the relationship between belongership and voting came in. I said, you have to keep in mind that this lady and a whole lot of others like her were voting before 2007. And before 2007, person with a belonger status alone couldn't vote. So you can't subject this person, yes you can, but it's not right to subject this person to having to prove that they are a belonger. So Premier, I want to say to you is the same way the passport office or whomever has been charged with that responsibility, or whoever designed the method to establish a criteria for belongership. They have to establish a criteria which for identifying those people who are Virgin Islanders or however you want to phrase it. But as it is right now, and you know we fought to have it retained, reinstated. As it is right now, your passport, the Virgin Islands passport, gets a little stamp on page 4 that indicates that you're a belonger, if you are a belonger. And it's funny because there are a whole lot of people who has that passport and they're not belongers. You can be a British Overseas Territory citizen and came. If you reside in the Virgin Islands and you want your passport renewed, that's the passport you will get, but you're not from Cayman Island or somewhere else. And you would not get that little stamp in the passport. So we have to find a method that would identify those people who, I think the status. So anyhow, if this person is listening, there's something I want to tell them. I got a call back from the elections office, supervisor of election, explaining to me that, in fact, it is true that you don't need to have to prove that you're a belonger in order to get the voter registration card. She said that if you were born before January 1st, 1983, in the Virgin Islands, and you're born to parents of Virgin Islands, extraction, or Virgin Islands parents, you just need to bring your birth certificate. Bring your birth certificate, and you'll get your voter registration card. And I encourage people to get that card because when you come to vote, it helps. It helps. So that would end that frustration. And I'll tell you this, Madam Speaker. A lot of Virgin Islanders who has opted to get a UK passport and don't have the Virgin Islands passport because it costs money and they find it to be somewhat unnecessary to just get a UK passport. And that passport can take you places that the Virgin Islands passport can't take you unless you have a visa. So it has an additional cost, and the level of frustration you might have to go through together sometime. So it's not just a message to the person who approached me, it's a message to everyone who is listening. And I want to applaud the supervisor of election for following up and being as flexible as she turned out to be. Premier, all the stuff that you said regarding this bill, including the objects and reasons I support, I think it's timely. We have a long way to go, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this bill includes residency. And you would cringe, Madam Speaker, when you know the facts behind residency. I think that we have to be more conscious of the public's purse when it comes to assistance grant. Assistance grant, Madam Speaker. In the United States, Madam Speaker, they have a thing where they say that a person who's a permanent resident cannot become a public charge. I was living in America and I couldn't get a job if I wanted it to sell tokens for the New York City Transit Authority. No big deal. It wasn't any big deal to me. It's no sweat off my brow. I know the rules. Couldn't get a job at the post office to deliver mail if I wanted to. No big job. No sweat off my brow. I know the rules. Those are the rules. And you couldn't go on welfare, Madam Speaker, because they have rules. They call it becoming a public charge. But when you come to this island, when you come to Tortola, or the Virgin Islands, Madam Speaker, no one wants to acknowledge the rules. So we find ourselves in a bind. We find ourselves in a bind. Whose fault is it? Us. You know, we're trying to be nice to everyone. We're trying to help everyone. And the country gets itself in a bind. We have to be mindful of the consequences of our actions, Madam Speaker. I've seen where people are being granted residence, Madam Speaker, and the things that they need to go through. And when you look at the things that they need to go through, Madam Speaker, by no stretch of the imagination, they all pass. And it's our responsibility to be the stewards, Madam Speaker. It's our responsibility to be the stewards of our country. The Premier spoke at length as what it means when he talked about patriotism and citizenship. He said not all citizens are patriots. If you ask the question, which would you prefer to deal with, a citizen who is not patriotic or a non-citizen who's patriotic, you ask yourself the question, which one would you prefer? According to him, patriotism trumps everything. Be a patriot. If all of us are patriots, Madam Speaker, we would have zero problems. Balsam Gut will be empty. The hospital will be only half full. There's a lot of people go to the hospital because they do unpatriotic things. Probably eat too much, drink too much, smoke too much. It makes for better citizenship. What can we do? And beginning with the bill before us, one of the things, what can we do? As we go into committee and we start scrutinizing it, we might have to put things in there, might have to take things out because of this patriotism the Premier spoke of. Do we want certain people to join the family? And when I say certain people, this has nothing to do with race, color, creed, or nationality. It's just the person and their refusal or failure to become a patriot. We have the opportunity to decide, Madam Speaker, whether or not a person should be or should not be a resident or belonger, because there are criteria for being those things. And if you don't meet those criteria, you could simply say no. And even after the committees that has been formed to advise on who should be these things, whether it's a belonger or a resident, the ultimate decision, Madam Speaker, is made by the Cabinet of the Virgin Islands. At one time, the governor used to issue a naturalization certificate, and in that certificate came along belongership. That's no longer the case. So the ultimate decision is made by the Cabinet of the Virgin Islands as to who we think should be among us in this community. Yes, friendship goes a long way, Madam Speaker, in making that decision, because when I say friendship, you see someone, whether you're male or female, you fall in love with that person, become friends with them. Not us, but people we know fall in love with someone, and so the friendships make the decision, help you make that decision too. But we have a responsibility, and we have to live up to it. The question is, are we living up to that responsibility? Are we allowing things to get between us and the decisions that we're supposed to make on behalf of our people? These are the people that we promise we're going to do right by them. And unfortunately, not always the decision we make are doing right by our people who elected us. So, Madam Speaker, I hope that we don't find ourselves being offended by things that others say in this House, especially when the thing that others say is true, Madam Speaker. I hope that we don't find ourselves being offended. We need to grow past that stage, else we can never work together if we don't get past that stage. Our aim, Madam Speaker, going forward is to work together. If we can't work together, these Virgin Islands will never be for the better. In a few weeks, Madam Speaker, we'll be debating the Constitutional Review Commission's report. In a few weeks. And if we can't debate that report in unison, Madam Speaker, we've been defeated. We've failed before we begun. I see we were debating this Law Review Commission's report. We didn't do it 100% unison, Madam Speaker. It wasn't 100%. I think that it's going to culminate into a letter that the Premier is going to send to the Governor and the Minister. And hopefully that letter will unify us. The fight that we have on our hand, Madam Speaker, is not inside this House. And I want people to understand that. It's not in this country, it's not in this territory, Madam Speaker. And I want people to understand that. It's beyond us. If we can't hold a single head, we are already defeated. I don't have to repeat it for you to know it, but you know that the governor is after immigration. I don't have to repeat it for you to know it. We said it ad nauseum when we were debating that law review report. When in God's name do you think? This house is 75 years old. When in God's name do you think it's going to change if you don't start changing it now? It's not going to change unless we change it. I'm saying to you that this immigration and passport amendment that we have here is governed by a British Nationality Act. It's governed by the British Nationality Act. This belongership and residency is something that it's just a local thing. We're trying to get some power back. That's all it is. That we say we issue a status to people. But the crux of the matter is, Madam Speaker, is the British Nationality Act. That's the crux of the matter. That's where the power lies, Madam Speaker. It's not in belongership and residency. So let's continue to fight against each other and see how far we're going to get. We're not going to get anywhere. We could only go backwards. Not going forward, fighting against each other. That's why 75 years, Madam Speaker, we're still here talking about this. The other Caribbean islands has moved on. More than 60 years ago, they got their independence and they moved on. Look at us. We're still here. Suffering from what has the appearance, Madam Speaker, of us don't think that we're good enough to be independent. I don't care what you say or what you think. There's a truth that it's a reality that you have to come to grips with. You're talking about something that you have no control of. It's governed by the British Nationality Act. Until we get a hold of that, we're going to continue talking like this. aside from the Commission of Inquiry, aside from that report that we just went through, we're going to see it when it comes to the Constitution. Imagine, Madam Speaker, you're going to hear a lot more about this, like it, and even more ferocious, Madam Speaker. Imagine we have a Constitution and we are going to have it reviewed. They give it to us, which we gave to a commission, to make recommendations. I'm wondering, if you look in this House, Madam Speaker, you got a lawyer, well-learned individual in the at-large representative. Business what? Talk to you, Mitch. Your background? Business entrepreneur, computer analyst, engineer, and I go down the line straight across. What more can you want in this House? What more can you want in this House to be as forward-thinking as anyone would expect to bring this country into the 22nd century? 21st, we are already in the 21st, almost more than a quarter of the way into the 21st century, into the 22nd century. Whatever action we take going forward has to be geared towards the 22nd century. And there's nothing stopping us from doing it but ourselves. Nothing. I know that there's a lack of trust among us. But is that our fault? Or is it someone else's fault that we have a lack of trust among ourselves? Ask yourself the question, whose fault is it? I submit to you that it is our fault. Us. I don't believe that the Deputy Speaker is in any way, shape, or form a threat to me. I don't believe that. I hope he don't believe that I'm a threat to him. See? Then I could prove it. Him and I, we talk, we walk the streets together. Here in Tortola. I met this man in Australia. We walk, we talk, we walk the streets together. Same guy. I'm not afraid of him. You afraid of me? I don't think so. Member for the 2nd District is the same. Even the member for the 4th. I met you in Australia, right? They're all good people. I can say the same for my at-large, my at-large friend Hodge Smith back here, his classmate. So I don't think that we should be afraid of each other. We need not be afraid of ourselves anymore. Let's pledge that we're going through this bill. We're going to do what we have to do without fear or favor. And we're going to look forward to the next piece of legislation or paper that comes before us. And we're going to hold a common position. And that common position is to work towards the liberation of the Virgin Islands. Building the institutions that needs to be built. The Minister of Finance has agreed that he will put whatever money is necessary to build our institutions, including the Attorney General's chambers. We don't want money anymore. Including the Attorney General's chambers, because the country could only go as far as the Attorney General's chambers takes us. Yeah. everyone out there is lawyering up, and if the government doesn't lawyer up, we're going to be behind. So, with that said, Madam Speaker, I am looking forward to vibrant exchange in the committee stage of this bill, and I implore members to seek whatever amendments they think are necessary, whether it's an amendment to this piece of legislation, this bill that's before us, or it's amendment to the bill, or the act that is not before us, to seek those amendments that are necessary, that they think this territory needs in order to put it in a position to continue on the path that we want to take it, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
Honorable members, the floor is now open for debate. I recognize the Leader of the Opposition, Honorable Myron Walwin.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm not going to be very long because I don't believe that the bill warrants very long discussion. I'll tell you why I say that, Madam Speaker, because I was able to read through this bill in about 15 minutes and understand what the bill is trying to do. Ostensibly, Madam Speaker, the bill is a cleanup bill. The bill that came number 6 of 2024, we made some errors in the bill. There's nothing new here that warrants me to stay on my feet to speak for a very long time on matters that do not affect the bill. But there are a few little things that I will seek to comment on very briefly. The definition of ordinarily resident, I see it here, and it says ordinary resident, with this to section 116.9, means the place of abode of a person in a particular place or country which he or she has legally adopted voluntarily and for settled purposes as part of the regular order of his or her life for the time being, consecutively, whether of short duration. It's good that you have we have defined now what we mean by ordinarily resident, because in the Substantive Act it's not there. And it's used throughout the Act, and sometimes it can cause confusion in terms of interpretation. But I just had a bit of a question in terms of legally adopted voluntarily. How does someone legally adopt somewhere? I think the word legal has to be removed from it and just say of a person in a particular place or country which he or she has adopted voluntarily rather than legally adopt. I think that may be an error there in the use of that word. I note that the bill also addresses something in relation to immigration officers who work at risk, Madam Speaker. And for instance, I'll just read a portion of it. 5A says, and the marginal note of the heading says hospital treatment and medical attention at government expense. 5A, all immigration officers are entitled to hospital treatment and medical and surgical attention. A, within the territory, if the treatment is immediately available in the territory, and B, outside the territory, the treatment is not immediately available in the territory. And the cost of the treatment and attention is a charge on the consolidated funds. So if you're working in the immigration department and you need medical or surgical attention, whether in the territory or outside the territory, I would imagine if it can be done in the territory, that'll be your first port of call. And if it can be done, then you do it outside, and that would be at the cost of the government. 2 says, if an immigration officer is incapacitated for his duty by his or her own misconduct, the minister may order that he or she forfeit the whole or any part of his or her pay for the period during which he or she is so incapacitated. Now, I want to go back to the first part about hospital treatment, and I'll cover my views, Madam Speaker, on 5B, that speak about funeral allowances that the bill now allows for immigration officers, and it allows for them to get assistance with burial costs, funeral costs, costs of post-funeral reception. If the person, let's say, might have been somebody who became a belonger but worked at the immigration department, they wanted to go back home to their place of origin, that the government would assist them. Premier, all this is good, but I believe what should have been done, I can't tell you how to do your job, but my view would have been that you should have probably brought this stuff in one bill for law enforcement officers, period. Because here you are doing something for immigration. I agree that immigration needs to get it, but they're not the only people who are at risk. You have customs at risk, you have prison officers at risk, and you have other people who carry out other duties that are quite risky. The people in the fire and rescue service. One bill should have been brought that covers the entire benefits here that you're putting here. Because I think the police have some of these similar things, but it's proper for us to do it across the board. And I hope that even though you've done it in this act, that it won't take very long before you come with something for law enforcement to make sure that there's uniformity across the board, because you can't have one set of law enforcement officers getting this benefit and the other persons who have the same risk not getting the same benefit. Then if you go back to 5A2, where it says that if the immigration officer is incapacitated for duty by his or her own misconduct, the minister may order that he or she forfeit the whole or part of her pay. Now, I'm hoping, Madam Speaker, that we can, during the committee stage, we can tighten this up a bit, because obviously I would hope, and sometimes you may have a prudent minister, but other times you may not have a prudent minister, that we can make sure that before anything happens in relation to forfeiting of pay, whether in whole or in part, that there is due process, that some sort of a decision process was undertaken, and it shows that the person would have had natural justice, they'd have had a chance to answer the allegations put against them, and that it was found out that they were in fact guilty of whatever the misconduct may have been. But to leave it open the way it is here for a minister possibly to be able to say, I withhold your pay like that, I don't think that is the right procedure. Some ministers might go through the right procedure, others may not. I think there needs to be some sort of protection somewhere along the line to make sure the right thing is done. And Speaker, Section 16 is really what we're here for. This is really the crux of what the bill is about, right? We, in the substantive act, I think the act of 2013, it mentioned that a person, to become a belonger, you'll have to have been orderly resident for a period of not less than 10 years. We went ahead in the last bill amendment that we did, and we made it 20 years. Essentially now, before a person become a belonger, they'll have to wait 30 years. 10 years for residency and 20 years for belonger. And that's what we're basically here for the bill. So while I listen to the Premier and the Deputy speak, I mean, I know we have at liberty to say all kind of things, but really that's what we're really here for, to make this change really. And that is a major change that is happening here. And I'm very glad, Madam Speaker, just to wrap up very quickly, because I say I don't think it requires a lot of discussion. And there are a number of consequential changes in here that errors were made for the old bill, and we're just trying to tidy it up, and which is a good thing. You make an error, you come to clean it up. But I'm glad that reforms are happening in immigration. And I wish that whatever the procedures are, we'll all become aware of them, because, Madam Speaker, we've had some trouble with immigration here. Because I remember we gave out 1,400 belongers to people. There was no criteria for giving out the belongers by the same Virginia's party government. Spouses at this and boyfriend at that, who don't know nothing about the BVI, got belongers. All manner of things happened under the same Virginia's party government. So I'm so elated very elated, Premier, and I congratulate you for understanding the importance of procedure, that things must be done in the right way. The BVI don't belong to any one of us. You can't take up belongings and give to your friends and your family and the spouses of party members. You can't do that sort of thing. So I'm really happy that the procedures have been put in place for this to happen. But Madam Speaker, really, the bill is really, as I said, just one to correct some errors. And so I support the bill entirely, because if you make an error, you have to come back and correct it. Thank you so very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. I recognize the Junior Minister for Culture, Honorable Luce Hodge-Smith.
Speaker, this bill, as we know, is very short. There are 12 sections, and as has mentioned before, it is to make some corrections and some slight additions to the amendments that were made to the substantive bill in 2024. So we actually have Immigration and Passport Amendment Act of 2024, and this Virgin Islands Immigration and Passport Amendment Bill of 2025. It's a short period in which we are going through this amendment of a bill that we had passed just last year. But, Madam Speaker, it is a very important aspect of the changes that need to be made, or the corrections that need to be made, as the previous speakers had mentioned. And my presentation, of course, will also be very brief. But before I get into the actual bill, Madam Speaker, I just want to share that, to reiterate, and I've said it before, that the importance of immigration, of course, you know what immigration is. It's a process of individual persons removed from their home countries to another country, and whether they decide to reside there, of course, or stay for a while, of course, they have to reside in this new country, and whether they decide they want to be a permanent resident or a citizen. And listening to the speakers from before, especially the Honorable Premier and the Honorable Deputy Premier, the importance of having understanding, having a common goal for the country, recognizing, of course, that we are of different backgrounds when we decide to migrate to another country. And I just want to reiterate the importance of diversity, the understanding, the appreciation, the acceptance of diversity. And that way, we can definitely have common goals and common objectives when we want to work towards developing the Virgin Islands. And we've also said that we have, persons from over 100 countries that are residing here. And of course, they all come to us with different backgrounds, different interests, and and of course their backgrounds, their cultural history, their cultural preservation from where they've decided to leave from, and then to come to the Virgin Islands and decide that they want to reside here for many reasons. They could be for economic benefits, and the fact that the Virgin Islands were a peaceful and safe place to want to live, and they have similarities to where they come from as well. So it's easy for persons to adjust themselves. So in a sense, Madam Speaker, what I want to say is that yes, we can have common grounds, we can have common objectives, but we also have to recognize the diversity of our community and to embrace this diversity. And that's the only way we can have social and cultural cohesion. And that way we can also have an understanding and an appreciation of each other. So with that said, Madam Speaker, although the fact that we just last year went through this process of this immigration and passport Act, and we're here again more recently now to make a few corrections and to add a little bit more to it. And it as the Premier also said, it's a process of immigration reform, and it's not going to stop now. It'll probably come back when things change and we develop a little bit more as a territory, as a country. We will see the need to come back again and find ways in which to amend this very same bill, because as a growing country, a developing country, we may see the need to come back. So the bill, as I said, it has 12 sections. Don't necessarily go through all the sections. The Honorable Leader of the Opposition did mention Section 5A and B, and these are inserted from the Principal Act is amended by inserting immediately after Section 1 the following. So these are new sections, and it's titled Hospital Treatment and Medical Attention at Government's Expense. And basically, Clause 5A1, all immigration officers are entitled to hospital treatment and medical and surgical attention. 5A1A, within the territory, if the treatment is immediately available in the territory, or B, outside the territory, if the treatment is not immediately available in the territory. And the cost of the treatment and attention is at the charge of the consolidated fund. And I think that's important to know. And as mentioned before, these officers have some high-risk jobs. And I support this particular aspect of the bill, where the government, through its consolidated fund, would provide and cover the cost of the hospital treatment and medical attention of these officers. And I also agree that a full review should be made of all the law enforcement officers, whether they are immigration, customs, police officers, and also fire officers are also high risk. If it's not being done, then we should review those laws that pertain to those, and the prison, of course, prison officers, and have a full review of all the laws that address those individual officers, and to come to a conclusion that they also deserve to receive such treatment because of their high-risk jobs. And we know what high-risk jobs they do carry out. And then from 5A2, if the immigration officer is incapacitated for duty by his or her own misconduct, the minister may order that he or she forfeit the whole or any part of his or her pay for the period during which he or she is so incapacitated. I also agree with this, Madam Speaker, but of course we will go into committee stage and we could discuss it a little bit more. I don't know if you'd want to say a percentage of what the government will cover and what the officer will cover. We could probably go into a little bit more detail into that. And then there's another section, 5B, the funeral and reception allowances. 5B1, subject to subsection 7, where an immigration officer dies while in the service of the department, the minister may grant a funeral allowance not exceeding such amount as the cabinet may, by order, specify for the purpose of defraying expenses incurred in relation to the funeral of the deceased. I agree with that. And 5B2, a funeral allowance may be granted under section 1, whether or not the deceased was on duty at the time of his or her death, and regardless of the circumstances of his or her death. And section 3, a funeral allowance may be granted in respect to a burial cost, funeral costs, including the cost of printing booklets or programs, cost of post-funeral reception, where the deceased died outside the Virgin Islands, the cost of transporting the body of the deceased from the place of his or her death to the Virgin Islands, or to such other country or territory as the payee may respect, being a country or territory to which the deceased was connected by virtue of birth, citizenship, marriage, family connections, or other reason. And of course, where the deceased died in the Virgin Islands, the cost of transporting the body of the deceased from the Virgin Islands to such other country or territory as the payee may request, being a country or territory in which the deceased was connected by virtue of birth, citizenship, marriage, family connections, or other reason. And of course, such other costs as the minister thinks fit. So again, Madam Speaker, I think that taking into consideration the high risk of these officers and their responsibilities, I don't see an issue with offering such payments for the officers and having a relief to them, to their families, having to cover these costs as well. So I go into section 29A, which is an inserted section. It's a new section, and it deals with enabling the commission of an offense. And clause 29A, an employer who enables a person to commit an offense under section 29 commits an offense and is liable on summary conviction to a fine of $5,000. I'm in total agreement to this because it gives the employer the responsibility to ensure that the persons that they hire are not are not committing an offense, and they knowing this is happening. I think sometimes you may not know, but it is really the responsibility of the employer to ensure that they're aware of the things that their employees are doing, or especially when it comes to immigration, to ensure that they are following the rules, following the laws. And so knowingly, if this is the case, then the employer will be responsible for this matter, and they will be fined an amount of $5,000. And then we go into section 30. There's a section 30:10, clause 10(1)(b), and this calls for by inserting immediately after subsection 3 the following section. It talks about the same thing actually. An employer who enables a person to commit an offense under this section commits an offense and is liable for a summary conviction of $5,000. So it's basically repeating the same thing. So, Madam Speaker, with those few words said, when we go into committee stage, and it's always very, very helpful when we go through each clause by clause and we have further discussions, I will be able to contribute there and give my further thoughts. So with those words said, Madam Speaker, I thank you.
Thank you. Any other member? I recognize the Deputy Speaker, Honorable Stacey Mather.
Good afternoon, Madam Speaker. Good afternoon to my colleagues in the chambers and to the people of the Virgin Islands. Madam Speaker, I'm going to be very brief. I think the members that spoke before me did a very good job of outlining the amendments in this bill. So I'll be very brief. Madam Speaker, if I may, with your indulgence, refer to the notes that I have here. Let me begin by stating, because I want to publicly state that I do support the amendments 5B, 5A and 5B in reference to immigration officers and having medical expenses and also funeral expenses being looked into. I think law enforcement plays a vital role, obviously, in this territory. And I would agree with the Leader of Opposition when he spoke about making this across the board for all members of law enforcement. So I just want to go on record supporting that. Moving along, Madam Speaker. One would note that, again, it was mentioned where we would say that Section 16 being amended, Madam Speaker, and that is the crux of perhaps why we're here. I think I am perhaps maybe the singular member, but I stand to be corrected in the House, who's ever been through a belanger status interview and process, Madam Speaker. If I may, I can recall that my father, who's been here since 1978, lost his first set of documents in a fire when immigration was on Main Street. And needless to say, that took a toll, and it took the process for him to get to where he had to go quite a lengthy time. From being quite personal, Madam Speaker, when I got my belanger status, I was attending primary school in the territory in the 1980s. And when I turned 18 and I received a government scholarship, because the government of the Virgin Islands at the time did recognize the value in me, as the Premier was talking about seeing value in each other, I got my scholarship while I had no status in the BVI. But I didn't run. I tried to rectify my status and get it rectified, but I didn't know that when I turned 18, that I would have lost my status because I lost the card physically, Madam Speaker. But I didn't know when I went to reapply for a replacement card that I was no longer deemed to belong to the Virgin Islands. I found that very interesting. And I know there are a number of people in our territory, both those who have parents that were born in the territory and perhaps they were not born in the territory, that fall in loopholes. And as the Deputy Premier said, perhaps we need to point to the British Nationality Act for some of these conundrums that we find some of our citizens in. But I do hope that at some point we can rectify these gaps where people find themselves in. I, for one, am grateful, especially for those who have to apply for belanger status in the territory, who want to be part of our territory, who want to be part of our country, who want to build our nation, who have contributed to our country, that, you know, we're clearing up this where it's actually 20 and not 30. 30 is quite a long time. Quite a long time. So I'm grateful that we're fixing that. Madam Speaker, I also recognize that Section 29, we're having an insertion, as was mentioned by the Junior Minister of Tourism and Culture. 29A, an employer who enables a person to commit an offense under Section 29 commits an offense and is liable on summary conviction to a fine of $5,000. Madam Speaker, this speaks to people landing, and then Section 30 also speaks to people overstaying and then landing. Madam Speaker, interestingly enough, I had a gentleman who said to me, people come to the territory on vacation, but they really come to look for employment, and they should be allowed to look for employment. Madam Speaker, I disagree with that. You're coming here for employment, you're coming here for employment. If you're coming here for a vacation, you're coming here for a vacation. We have laws. And while some employers may not be aware of the fact that their employees are doing things or that contravene the law, Madam Speaker, I think some of them may encourage it. So I think there's fairness in this, Madam Speaker. There's balance in putting a fine on employers who go against what is required, whether they're doing it and they're knowledgeable of it, or maybe they're ignorant of it. But either way, being fair is something we should do. Madam Speaker, I also want to applaud this amendment, Section 31, where it has another insertion, and I read, where the person, so this refers to people who are, let me read it out, where a person is referred to in subsection 1C is in the process of transitioning from gainful employment to a dependent of a spouse or parent. The Chief Immigration Officer may permit that person to remain in the territory for the purposes of transitioning from gainful employment to a dependent of the spouse or parent. Yes, Madam Speaker, we have some people sometimes who are 18, they've been in the Virgin Islands, and they're trying to find employment. I've seen many cases of that over the years. Or you have someone who's a spouse of someone who's gainfully employed in the BVI, and they need to be able to stay versus being asked to exit. Madam Speaker, this will be my last contribution or statement on the bill. Madam Speaker, I am delighted to see that we are addressing, and the Premier went at lengths to talk about this, resident and ordinary resident in the territory. Madam Speaker, this is fine. We do need to define this. What I will ask, I know in some meetings, very informal meetings, we talked about other legislations where we look at how a person has and how they're deemed to be registered to vote. The Deputy Premier brought it up. I hope that other legislations across the board will reflect this change when it comes to ordinary resident and resident, because we must make sure that no one law contradicts the other. So I encourage those who are listening, those who are drafting, to ensure that we are where we need to be, where that is concerned. And Madam Speaker, I will take my seat, and I look forward to the committee stage on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member? I recognize the Minister for Health and Social Development, Honorable Vincent Wheatley.
Oh, there we go. Thank you, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity to say a few words on this very important subject, not so much the bill per se, but the subject of immigration. Madam Speaker, immigration is one of the hottest topics, I would say, around the world now. The Premier said even the Catholic Pope, before he died, his message had to do with how they treat immigration and immigrants, as he felt most of the world, particularly America, were being hostile to immigration persons coming to the country. We have a long history in this country of immigration. It started, I think, in the 60s, when tourism started. I remember, but the laws were different. I remember those first set of persons who came to Virgin Islands from St. Vincent. They didn't even need a passport or anything to come to the BVI then. But as the BVI developed, we saw a need to control the number of persons coming into the territory. So anything to do with immigration is going to be a kind of a sensitive topic, because your immigration policies are going to affect the face and character of your country. And when I was Minister for Immigration, we did a lot of amendments, because we realized your immigration policies are directly linked to the flavor of your population. When I speak last week, the last time we were in the House, the Premier read a passage from the territorial song. The second verse is a verse that we don't often hear too often, to where I had forgotten that verse, because we often go straight to the third. I want to read this second verse with your permission, because I think if we all who live in this territory adhere not only to this verse, but the whole of the territorial song, it will put us all in a good footing for what we need to do. And the verse goes like this: "We shall protect your beautiful shores and uphold your dignity. We shall fight to preserve your culture, your splendor, and integrity. And we shall never fail to understand how blessed we are to possess this land. So we shall unite, standing proud and tall. Let none divide us, lest we fail." Now, what's the connection between this and immigration? Because whenever we have these citizenship ceremonies, you see that people get antsy, say, oh, we're giving away the country, or we have to watch who we bring to this country, and on they go about it. In the third verse, calls for courage for all great leaders. And I think this verse says sometimes person just narrow it down to the political leaders, but I think it's meant for all leaders, whether you're in business, whether you're in politics, whether you're in a church, or so forth. That we do things with courage, but also with wisdom and out of love. The BVI has been and will continue to be a beautiful place to live, work, visit, and invest. That has been saying that since 2019. It's a beautiful place. But Madam Speaker, at some point in time, if you want to preserve what you have, and you don't just stumble into your future, you have to deliberately plan out what your future is going to be. And immigration is one of those areas there. where we have to actually be courageous with some of our decisions. The Deputy Premier mentioned two things when he spoke that caught my attention, because I have been contemplating those two very things since becoming Minister of Health and dealing with social development, and that's the issue of assistance grants and the issue of public charge. These things cannot be ignored, Madam Speaker, because they're directly linked to your immigration policies. And if you make the wrong immigration policy, your public charge and your assistance grants, you will go bankrupt. A wrong policy will send you bankrupt on these two areas there. So we have to be very mindful how we handle this immigration. So you can call for some courage, because I don't think the correct decisions will be popular and would call for courage. A lot of people will not like what you're going to do, but I think it's necessary that we could safeguard and live according to our territorial song. To go to the actual bill itself, Madam Speaker, and the junior minister went through there along with a few others, but these two amendments say, 5A, all immigration officers are entitled to hospital treatment and medical and surgical attention. A, within the territory, the treatment is immediately available in the territory, and B, outside the territory, if the treatment is not immediately available in the territory. That's because they're not the first to get it. We're simply expanding this coverage to include immigration officers. And I'm not sure the customers involved there. I think the police get some. But this is a good move, because we put these people on the front line. When we're home sleeping, they're out on the boats with customs. They're all through the bush doing this and doing that. And something happens, and they have to go in their pocket for this damage. And also the funeral and reception allowance. I am not sure the financial implication here, but it says subject to subsection 7, when immigration officer dies while in the service of the department, the minister may grant a funeral allowance not exceeding such amount as the cabinet may, by order, specify for the purpose. I have never seen this ever for an immigration officer. I've seen it for police officers. So I'm very, very pleased. It's a very positive step to encourage these officers who sometimes feel neglected by us and only come under criticism. Some of the harshest criticism you ever find in this country is leveled against immigration. And sometimes rightly so, but we have to also try and assist them. And as the Minister for Immigration, I won't say I defended them, but I explained sometimes the challenges they have dealing with visitors coming to this country. When you're asking certain persons to work long hours, some of them were the lowest paid at that time. That has since changed, thanks to the Premier. You pay me the least, you work with me the longest, you work with me overtime. My children home, I got to hire a babysitter. I ain't got no money to pay the babysitter because you have me working these outrageous hours at a minimum salary, and then you want me to smile. I thought I was unfair to them then, but I've seen things turned around to where they're now not at the bottom anymore, and they're getting the support. And this is just one more thing to help these persons on the front lines, to show our love to these persons as we leave forward. The confusion of resident and ordinary resident and all this, I'm so glad it's finally being cleared up. But the minister, at last member said, Deputy Speaker, about making sure we don't create any conflict. I don't think that is the case, because we had a lot of discussions on this very topic to make sure we don't create confusion. It was meant to clear up confusion, because certain persons think once they have something called a resident, it means all kinds of different things. So we've cleared it up. Hopefully it's cleared up and there are no conflicts anyway. Madam Speaker, we've seen a confusion in the States with how the Trump administration is treating the immigrants, persons who've come into the country and get status. And I particularly been following that case with El Salvador, where the gentleman is just picked up, put on a plane and sent to El Salvador. I hope we never get to that stage where we need to do that. I think that's cruel and inhumane. But we cannot ignore the Haitian crisis that's happening very close to us and what this could mean for us and how we handle immigration laws to protect this territory, but also to safeguard their human rights today. So, Madam Speaker, I commend the Premier for bringing this. I think this was part of what held up this bill for me, and I sent it to in a long time, making sure that we clarify these little things in here. So, Madam Speaker, with just those few words there, I will take my seat. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member? I recognize the member for the 2nd District, Honorable Melvin Turnbull.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to give my contributions to the amendment bill, the Immigration and Passport Amendment Bill of 2025 that is before us today. And Madam Speaker, I listened with intent to when the Honorable Premier opened with his contributions on this debate, because I knew he would find a way to transition, and just in his own good style, he found a way to do it. So rather than me transitioning there, I'm going to start there, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, today is an amazing day in the British Virgin Islands. Before I get to the Queen of today, I'll be foolish to forget the Queen of yesterday, which was my mom, who celebrated her birthday on yesterday. And then we come to today, where we celebrate Honorable Reimer and his sister, Kirsten Reimer, and my great aunt, Miss Esme Stout. But there's a special young lady I also want, since we're celebrating birthdays, all BV Islanders, I want to celebrate Miss Taraji on her birthday today. But Madam Speaker, we celebrated the 100th birthday of my great aunt, my father's sister, Miss Esme Stout, who was the wife of the late Honorable Prince Stout, who served as a member in this House, brother to our first Chief Minister and pioneer, visionary of these here Virgin Islands in terms of leadership. And Madam Speaker, when I was asked by my family to give remarks, I couldn't just go there and wing it because of what Muddy, as we affectionately call her, means to me. So I penned something that I shared on social media just a few moments ago, a couple hours ago, and I was able to read it for her and for the audience that was there. And Madam Speaker, understanding this legacy that exists in this family that I am born into and blessed into. Miss Esme is now 100. I believe one of my other great aunts, Miss Liza, was 107 or 9 before she passed away. My grandfathers on both sides were in their 80s. But the legacy, Madam Speaker, in terms of years is a blessing, because we are expected to, according to Scripture, get our 10. And Miss Esme got her 10 plus 30. But what was one of the most significant things, Madam Speaker, about today's celebration, understanding that Stout family, that Stout Raima Turnbull family that we are connected to is listening to the tribute of her life done by her daughter, the seventh child, Janice Stout, which capsulated 100 years of her life. Speaking of when her and her husband, the late Prince Stout, built the home where she is currently living. And it speaks about Prince leading the donkey or the mule with the sand from the pond mouth and the stones, them blue mitch rock. The blue mitch rock, them, Madam Speaker. Because I want to use parliamentary language, the blue mitch rocks. And then Miss Esme on the rear, holding on to the donkey or the mule's tail, bringing up whatever load that she could to help build this house. And her two eldest boys, Denzel and Alfred, doing what they could. But not just building their house, building a family, building discipline, building love, building the fear of God, building what we know to be the strength and the foundations of the Virgin Islands people. Hearing her life being spoken about, Madam Speaker, in reference to her brother, my late grandfather, Maurice Mento Turnbull, her neighbors, Uncle Mako House, Dawson, and all the people that form that family, that community, that legacy that we now have the opportunity to benefit from. And just in the way that Modi would have served her community and served her family, her children are serving these Virgin Islands. P.S. Igwe, Permanent Secretary. You have Janice Stout serving in the legal profession. You have Charlene Stout serving in Social Security. You have Chef Willow Stout serving the BVI as one of the top chefs for many years. Denzel and all of those boys who went to big school in Canil Bay. Service industry that helped to build our tourism product. Then you go on to the grandchildren. David Archer Jr., the Deputy Governor. Persons like Brent Hoyt and Siobhan Hodge and Corby Hodge and service, Madam Speaker, to this community, contributing back to this community. So, Madam Speaker, that is one of the things that, again, it helps me appreciate this privilege and honor that I am given to represent these here Virgin Islands, because persons like Mrs. Smith Stout, persons like Lillian Turnbull, persons like May Blanche Klein and Albert Lee Klein and those persons that pave the way for us to now walk and stand and continue to build on foundations that we now have. Madam Speaker, I also, something else that the Premier said, and I made notes while he was talking, because I said, well, at least somebody has been listening to me. Because when the Premier started, Madam Speaker, it's something that I've been saying for the last 10 years in this house. When it comes to building a Virgin Islands that we can continue to be proud of, and not being ashamed of who we are, not being ashamed of where we've come from, not being ashamed to even tell it from the mountaintop. The story of a Virgin Islands people. But Madam Speaker, that story told on one side and leaving out the context of some other sides is an incomplete story. And I'll say what I mean, Madam Speaker. I've said it many times in the debates, and including the last one on the law reform, the law review, Madam Speaker. HLS Stout understood the vision, and it was repeated by many persons in this house after I said it. But again, Madam Speaker, one thing I appreciate in this house, usually when I say something, nobody to hear it. When somebody else says something, the sound is better. So I don't mind that people repeat what I say, and every now and again you could just give a little credit to who say it, rather than pirating. But plagiarizing, that's the proper word. Madam Speaker, the other side of the story of these Virgin Islands is, while it was built by those of us who were left here, those of us that were left here found ways and means to travel to other Caribbean islands and territories, neighboring Caribbean islands and territories, to be able to find employment, to be able to provide for their families. That's part of the story that we don't tell too much. We just tell about how, we fight them. And Madam Speaker, while those of us who went to other Caribbean islands and territories went to provide, there were other persons that came to live among us who helped to contribute towards the building and development of this territory with those of us who remained. Significant part of the story, Madam Speaker. Because the Virgin Islands or any other Caribbean territory was built by those of us who were brought from Africa. That's why we have so many similar traits. That's why so many of us have some of the same dialect and accents and cultural aspects of our diversity, Madam Speaker. We are black people, we are a Caribbean people, we are one people. And Madam Speaker, it can't just be convenient for us to choose when and how we explain or highlight that we are indeed one people. It can't just be to make a point depending on what is being debated or what is put before us or what is the hot topic. Madam Speaker, it has to be the story. Madam Speaker, one of the best things, I believe one of the best opportunities for me in my life was being shipped out of here into Todd Farm to finish school, because then I got appreciation, because I never got it here in the BVI. I got appreciation to understand African American history and African Caribbean history from 1995 all through my college years, because I attended a historically black college and university. And in understanding that and having appreciation for who we are, Madam Speaker, when I moved back home to the BVI in 2005 after leaving in 1994, I came back here and there was this I've always been there, but it just seemed more pronounced, I guess, because I was a little older, a little bit more mature. I had more of a voice. So I would speak and listen and debate, and if I didn't agree with something, I would share my views. But when I came back home in 2005, Madam Speaker, there was this, we are indeed a proud people in the Virgin Islands, we have every right to be. But there started to be, Madam Speaker, and it still exists, where we were putting down and being very prejudiced towards people from other Caribbean islands and territories. Madam Speaker, that ain't who I am. When it comes to people, Madam Speaker, I love all people, black, white, Indian, Chinese, and Chief. And there was a debate in the job that I was in, all these island people this, and this island people this, and this island people that, and Madam Speaker, they need to go back home, and they need to go back home. And Madam Speaker, I remember saying it to a management meeting we had. And I said it, and I still believe it now. Because while I am a BB Islander, first and foremost, proud, I said this to the persons who were having a debate. We keep talking about this island that. If we were for a second to send home everybody who we don't call or consider indigenous Virgin Islands, you know what a BB Island will become? A slum. And I dare anyone to debate me on it. But what is easier for us to do, Madam Speaker, is just that. There's nothing wrong with me pushing up Virgin Islands. But me pushing up Virgin Islands, I ain't stepping on nobody else, Madam Speaker. I am not stepping on anybody else because I need everybody. You want to talk about unity, Madam Speaker? When we talk about unity, it can't just be speaking about unity. The very acts of what we do have to be unified. But where does this come from, Madam Speaker? It comes from the very colonialistic way in which we were brought up from slaves into where we are. And it exists right now, even in the systems for which we continue to operate here in this territory. Madam Speaker, you go through your high school, primary high school education, you're expected to go and look at job or go look work. From my grandparents' time to now. 7th standard, you either go find a job in a bank, clerical or trust company or whatever the case may be, and you earn what is the normal acceptable rate of pay for somebody coming into an entry-level position, which, Madam Speaker, if I go back to when I came back home, or when I would have graduated high school in 97, was somewhere between $800 and $1,000 a month for an entry-level position, because that's what the average was, and that's what we accept, and that's what we promote here in these Virgin Islands. And don't you dare ask for more money, because that is not the average. That is not what is expected of you. But Madam Speaker, I spent some time in my profession as a financial consultant and investment manager. And I used to manage pension plans here in the British Virgin Islands. The time has already passed, so I'm going to talk the thing now, so we understand. While we here in the Virgin Islands are trained to high school or even college when you come back, you're expected out of high school to earn between $1,000 and $1,400 a month. If it's college, between $25,000 to $35,000 a month. Because that's what they offer me. I'm going to tell you a story here now. I'm going to talk the business. I left American International Group in 2005 in Hollywood, Florida as associate manager. My salary for the 2 years I served as associate manager was up of $120,000. When I moved back home to my beautiful BVI, the 2 jobs that I applied for and got, they offered me $35,000 a year. At AIG, Fortune 100 company, over $800 billion in assets, I could sign off on up to an account of over $50 million by myself, between 23 and 25 years old. And when I came back home to my beloved BVI, $35,000 was the salary. You know why, Madam Speaker? You know the reason I was told? Well, you're young. Well, I have the experience and I have the college, but you're still young. We know you because you're a Pastor Mel in Maureen Bay. You come from King Island, you just come back and you got learn the ropes. And I said to myself, Madam Speaker, this is the craziest thing. So I got hired in December for that job. I didn't start till March because I needed to get more money. Because I believed in my value. I believed in my worth. And the person that was there in that particular job before me, with less education and less qualification than me, were earning $80,000 a year. Guess what, Madam Speaker? Madam Speaker, that person was from South Africa. Madam Speaker, that person was from South Africa. And that person came from South Africa with a briefcase. You know how we are about these people with briefcases? They put all kind of things on these papers, Madam Speaker, all kind of things to beef up, certificate for this and certificate for that and certificate for the other, Madam Speaker. And when they come, they can't do a lick of the work. And I said to myself, okay, well, I'm going to prove to my boss that every single target that is set for me, I'm going to exceed it. And every month, Madam Speaker, I ask for a raise. I ain't lying to you. Ask him. He right there. Go down the form, you ask him. Every month, I ask for a raise. Because my intention, you going to at least carry me to where this man was. But while, Madam Speaker, doing these pension and investments, I got to see something a little bit interesting. Financial services has been the key pillar of revenue earning pillar of the economy of the head of the Virgin Islands. Madam Speaker, the legal persons in the legal profession that had over 10 years, Honorable Wheatley, who's the Minister for Labor, not Premier, Minister for Labor, that had over 10 years of experience, that had their bachelors, that were called to the Bar Association of the British Virgin Islands. They were paid between $120,000 and $160,000 a year. Same counterparts that didn't look like us. I was going to tell the truth and shame the devil. I'm going to say the things what you're afraid to say. That same individual, Madam Speaker, would start at $300,000. And all people were happy. And all people would walk around this BVI, walking on them counterparts in the legal profession who might not be working for one of the higher recognized firms because they might be earning 80 or whatever. Madam Speaker, and I used to be like, listen, I realize I ain't nowhere in this game. But that's not it, Madam Speaker. The managing partners and directors of these companies were upwards, I'm talking about back in 2007. Back then, they were earning between $400,000 and $500,000 a year. And when they come to be managing director of these companies, you know who were training them? Oh, people. They may not lick. That's what exists in our BVI. That's what exists in our BVI, and that's what we continue to promote in our BVI, Madam Speaker. And if we're going to talk about unity, if we're going to talk about building this BVI and continue to build this BVI, whether Jamaica, St. Vincent, Antigua, St. Kitts, or wherever you come from in the Caribbean region. Madam Speaker, if we look within and realize our strength and realize what this founding father of all BVI mindset was, Madam Speaker, we could change the trajectory of what this BVI is immediately. Immediately, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, when we talk about unity, as I said last week or the week before when we were debating that bill, you can't just talk about it because your actions have to demonstrate it, Madam Speaker. You can't be lawless in wasting money and making decisions that are not good and then calling them mistakes and then don't want nobody to hold you up to account. And then we talk about having unity. Madam Speaker, unity means making a decision in the best interest of the people all times. And when you have a view that challenges yours, Madam Speaker, rather than being antagonistic towards that view, Madam Speaker, you look to it to see if you got any sense in it, and you adjust yourself accordingly. So, Madam Speaker, this bill, I don't know why it keeps coming up, but it's going to make sense soon. Madam Speaker, 5A of this bill, and it is something that we are now doing, and if I am speaking out of turn, Premier, I want you to make note of this so you could correct it. I don't have a problem with it because I don't want to mislead the House. Madam Speaker, I see where we are now in 5A, hospital treatment and medical attention at government expense. I don't know, and I'm hoping, just for the sake of my debate, that this doesn't already exist for officers of the Royal Virgin Islands Police Force. And if it does, please tell me. Because it does, Premier. It exists. Lord, keep me near the cross. We're going in now. Madam Speaker, all immigration officers are entitled to hospital treatment and medical and surgical attention within a territory. A, within a territory if the treatment is immediately available in a territory. B, outside the territory if the treatment is not immediately available in the territory. And the cost of the treatment and attention is a charge on the consolidated fund. Madam Speaker, I talk about being responsible. This is the responsible thing to do. They are frontline officers. But doing this, no. If it already exists for the officers of the Royal Virgin Islands Police Force, the leader opposition highlighted that we need to include customs. We would need to include persons on hazardous pay as well, because they're putting their life at risk every single day. But if we're doing this now for immigration officers, which I agree in, can somebody please tell me what is the cost? And I want to know the cost, not because I don't think they deserve it. I want to know the cost because we should be anticipating what this is going to cost, Madam Speaker. Because it drives me to my next argument. I'm coming back to the police. During Standing Finance, Madam Speaker, I had a very interrogative session with the team from the Ministry of Health and Social Development and NHI specifically. And I asked a question about persons who are exempt. The exempted persons that are territory from NHI and paying medical bills for care in this territory. And I was told persons from the Royal Virgin Islands Police Force, persons from immigration, all the first responders, persons over the age of 65, and persons between 0 and 18. And then I asked a question, Madam Speaker, what happens if the care that these persons are seeking and are referred to outside of the territory because we don't provide it, what happens to that cost? They said they have to pay a copay. And I asked them, Madam Speaker, and I'm asking now, if I am exempt from paying NHI and I don't have a copay locally, and you don't have the services for me locally, and you send me abroad, how can I have a copay if I am exempt? Because that's drawing me to this then. Then this going to contradict what currently exists. Because if you have treatment in the territory, available in the territory, or outside the territory, if the treatment is not immediately available in the territory, and the cost of the treatment and attention is a charge on a consolidated fund, which means that your care is covered and there should not be a copay. Minister, am I making sense or am I making sense? Okay. And then it carries on to incapacitation, it carries on to the misconduct, etc., etc. So I want us to understand that while Cabinet has the agreement to decide on what expenses are being paid, are coming back to the police now. If this already exists for members of the Royal Virgin Islands Police Force, and I'm going off of what the Premier said, because he is the Minister of Finance. If there's a benefit that is already covered, duty allowance for, in respect of burial costs, funeral costs, including the cost of printed booklets, cost of funeral reception. Help me to understand, Madam Speaker. Why when? And I hear the other side of the argument, but I'm going back to this gentleman. God rest his soul. A former member of this house, who we laid to rest recently, who was Commissioner of Police, who we laid to rest recently, the House of Assembly bore the cost of burying this individual. And Madam Speaker, I'm going to say without fear, because this is what I was told. The contribution from the Royal Virgin Islands Police Force for a former commissioner was a measly $1,000. So help me understand, if the money there, how come things come forward? But if it happened to be somebody else, who will look like we, all expenses will be paid. Madam Speaker, we got to be careful what we do. We got to be careful what precedents we set in. It can't be unity when we are expected to fight against we. It can't just be okay because this is what the UK say. Because here's another part that we have to challenge. The very review from the law review that was done by Mr. Cook. Cook? What's his name? Cook. Challenged some of the things that we were doing. So, Madam Speaker, if they're going to put in some special clauses and some excluding clauses for us to be able to qualify, and then we here fighting to put in some clauses for us to be able to qualify, and they disqualified us at the highest level. Because it's the same thing, the same argument with the trust companies. You need to be able to speak French and Dutch and you have to live in Gibraltar for 5 years and this and that, the case may be. But Speaker, or people who've been in this industry 15 and 20 and 30 years, who understands everything that we are doing through regulations with FSC and all the governing bodies, the AG chambers and all the legal professions who are here. Madam Speaker, you tell me these people don't know what to do? But we continue to marginalize them and say, okay, well, this is what the industry demands. Who the industry for? Madam Speaker, we have to be bold. We reference Cayman Islands and Bermuda when it comes to different standards for laws. Like the UK, you like to, during the COI, they wanted to show us what Cayman Islands and TCI were doing, and what was our argument? They had a constitution suspended. Don't bring that to me. We want to see that. Because this is what you want to enforce on me. But how about some of the privileges that you give them? Why you can't give them to us? Why is it not okay for us to get these same privileges and rights? Madam Speaker, Cayman Islands says you got work permits into the territory. What is it, 7 years? Who's Minister of Labor? Minister of Labor? 7 years in Cayman Islands? We say it, and it don't have to be 7 years. It don't even have to be 10 years. But what are we aspiring to become? We say what we're going to do with the pension plan. We say what we're going to do with certain things. We say what we're going to do in different fields that we know we should be doing. But we say it for the sake of talking, Madam Speaker, and no action behind it. We gotta make a decision. Madam Speaker, I'm wrapping up. Right now. I had some things to say. Madam Speaker, this bill is trying to bring us to the point where we understand what ordinarily resident means clearly. It is also attempting to bring a clear definition and enforce the period of time for which you are eligible to receive belanger status. And Madam Speaker, while this was one of the hot topics that we went through during the COI, and even came up in the review of the Constitutional Review Committee, Madam Speaker, it is something that I believe we've come to a decision and a position that we can live with. But Madam Speaker, sometimes doing one thing and making a decision like this without understanding how it affects different aspects of your economy, of your social system, Madam Speaker, of what it's going to do for retirees, what is the cost to the purse, what do we need to do in education, what do we need to do in healthcare, Madam Speaker. We have to take all these things into consideration so that when we make a decision like this and solidify it with the cost for funeral expenses and the cost for medical expenses, Madam Speaker, we have a view, Madam Speaker, that we can articulate to the people of the Virgin Islands. This is what was done, and it was done in this way to be able to avoid it costing X, costing Y, or costing Z. And we are able to cover it based on what we have in a consolidated fund. This is what we're hoping to put aside. If we move towards a defined contribution pension plan, it would save us this amount, which allows us to do these other things. Madam Speaker, we keep having these individualistic conversations, Madam Speaker. We're not covering the whole ambit of how one thing affects another. Madam Speaker, I am in support of the amendments. I need to clearly understand, especially 5A and 5B. how it is going to work based on what I read, Madam Speaker. It is something that is now being introduced. And it needs to be, as the leader opposition said, introduced across the board. But Madam Speaker, we also need to understand what is going to cost. Help persons and families understand. So the HR department will need to understand, Madam Speaker, what this means for families and be able to clearly articulate this to them so that they know your loved one is serving in a capacity of high risk. But in the event he or she becomes ill or even passes away, this is what is expected for you, and this is what the government of the Virgin Islands is putting in place for you because we value the service that you're giving. So, Madam Speaker, again, I support this bill before us, and I look forward to having a further contribution and understanding a little bit more details in the committee stage. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Any other member? Any other member? Should I call on the Premier to wrap up? Oh, I recognize the member for the 8th District, Honorable Marlon Penn.
Yeah, Madam Speaker, and Premier, why are you so quick to pull the trigger? Thank you for the opportunity to say a few words, Madam Speaker. I didn't intend to speak, Madam Speaker, because based on the actual amendment, when I was listening on the way here, I was like, is the same bill we talking about? Madam Speaker, I got a little confused for a second, Madam Speaker. But I think immigration, Madam Speaker, is one of those topics that is now on the forefront because of the actions of the Commander-in-Chief of the United States of America, and all the things that are deriving from that is a hot topic, but I think it's a topic that's always going to have these type of discourse, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the amendments before us, we had this process, we went through this process last year when we had the initial suite of amendments to the bill. And Madam Speaker, I know that the current amendments is pretty much a cleanup exercise of the amendments that were made last year, Madam Speaker. But it's important for us to still go through the process. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, I don't go through the specifics in the bill that I have, particularly not a concern, but it's just a caution, Madam Speaker. As your member spoke previously about 5A of the bill, which speaks to the entitlement of treatment for immigration officers. And it's true, Mr. Speaker, that this, Madam Speaker, I don't know why I call you Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker. It is true, Madam Speaker, that this was discussed and deliberated in the Unity Government Premier, if you recall. And we had a situation where there was I think it was a fire officer that needed to get, that passed and needed support. And we had a discussion back and forth in terms of why that privilege was not and has not been extended to the other law enforcement officers or officers that fall within the same remit. And I agree with the members that spoke before, and I agree that I'm happy that it's here for the immigration officers, but I agree that it has to be extended. And the cost is very critical as well. I know one of the things that we looked at previously, and there was a match on this around the territory. If NHI is good for us, it should be good for them. We looked at an insurance policy because we knew that, particularly for members, that there's an ongoing cost that supports members in this regards. And we looked at where it could be more cost effective. I think the same has to be true, Premier, considering the growing and ballooning costs of the recurrent expenditure, to find a way to ensure that this particular element is covered in some way. And I agree with the member who spoke just previously to me, that I think the member was part of the committee that looked at that to manage the cost of this. And I believe that is something that needs to be rethink, Premier, and we also have to look at it from a long-term perspective, if this is going to be the norm going forward. And I agree, I support it. I think it's something that should happen. Those persons should also, as was said previously, should also get hazard pay if they're not getting hazard pay already. But we have to find a way to properly cost it and properly support the costing of it. And I think some kind of financial instrument could be used to do this Premier across the board, not just for these particular officers, for all the other areas where there's a need for government to support those things. Because you can't just continue to put things on a charge to the consolidated fund. That charge could go, healthcare costs and how they could balloon. Right now, particularly these motorcycle accidents, many of these individuals are not covered, but NHI still has to pick up the bill. And sometimes the bill goes in excess of $500,000 in some cases. So there has to be a way to properly finance and ensure that this cost is covered. And particularly Section 16 as well, which is the amendment to the term limits, which is something that has been discussed. There was a policy in place for years that spoke to 20 years, that never regularized the legal remit. And I think that is necessary for us to make sure that whatever the process is, to make sure that the process is clear. Because, Madam Speaker, at the end of the day, if people are coming to live amongst us, come to migrate and make the BVI their home, they need to have a level of understanding of what they're getting into. There needs to be some certainty in the process, a certainty in the procedures. If they want to work with BVI for 10 years, 20 years, what their benefits are, or what they need to aspire to, so that there needs to be clarity in terms of that entire process, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it goes back to, again, transparency. Madam Speaker, I support reform, but we have to be open and transparent with the level of reforms that we're putting in place. I think we attempted that in 2024. Madam Speaker, the amendments are just to clean up this exercise. But there's a component, Madam Speaker, and it might not be popular. I won't go into all the other things that I heard earlier. I think there's going to be a time and a place for that, and we'll deal with those things when we get there. But there's a component that seems to be missing for some time, Madam Speaker, the issue of enforcement and having that level of a task force and a review of people who are legitimately resident in the territory or legitimately belong or deemed to be here in the territory, whether it's through belonger status, residence, or whatever. But there are people here that we have a large force of persons who are illegally, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it was a few months ago that someone who I thought would have been a resident or had a particular status, come to find out the person who was living here in the BVI with no type of status, immigration status, for over 5 years. And I don't think that's an isolated situation. I know before we used to have a situation where there was a task force within the immigration department that used to go out periodically to make sure that persons are doing the things that they should do, to make sure that the status are regularized, whether it's through a work permit, exemption, or whatever the process is. I think we need to get back to that place. It was not to the scale that I'm seeing right now, where a person even with legitimate status is being targeted and harassed. But I think persons need to go through the legitimate process to reside within the territory. And I think this legislation seems to clear up those uncertainties or those irregularities. But Premier, you need to put that task force back in place. I know at one point it was so overzealous, some would say, that we had a discussion just recently where about the same topic about persons who are in the territory legally, etc. And one belonger actually said that when he was in the 60s, I think it was, he said, 60s and the 70s, he was taken up by the task force then and sent back to Antigua. When he said he's a belonger, he just went for the trip. He went for a vacation and he came back. But the reality is that we need to have a proper process to ensure that persons are abiding by the law, are doing the things that are necessary to ensure that they get their status and regularized. And I believe that task force, Premier, whether it's external body or within immigration, again, needs to be strike up again and go forward. But again, I think the reforms are necessary. We have to there's going to be the question on how severe, how rigid they are. The bill hasn't gone into force, as I understand, Premier, since the amendments that were made in 2024. So I'm sure once these amendments are made, the bill will go into force, and we get our chance to test the system, to see how the system is working, how the reforms are working, and there might be need for additional amendments to the immigration reform. It's an ongoing process, and these reforms and reformations will be necessary from time to time. But there needs to be certainty. We need to ensure that the people that come to reside amongst us know what the process is, if they want to reside and be a resident and be a belonger, and what the privileges are from those various statuses. There needs to be clarity in the process. Right now, there's a sense of uncertainty when you speak to people, when they ask you, I've been here for so much X amount of years, what am I entitled to? There's no clarity in the public space on the belonger side and on persons who are trying to become belongers or residents. So we need to make sure, Premier, once we're done with this process, there's a public consultation process with the people of the territory. So there's a level of understanding of what is afforded of them, especially after we know that the entire amendments that were made in 2024 have not gone into force as yet. So we have to ensure that we educate persons on those changes and the subsequent changes that we're making today. So again, Madam Speaker, I support the reformation process. I look forward for us to have a more healthy discussion in the committee stages as we make the necessary changes in the immigration process. I thank you.
Thank you. I recognize the member for the 1st District, Honorable Carl Dawson.
Speaker, for the opportunity to make a contribution to this bill that everybody has gotten up and said it's a simple cleanup bill. But we've been scrubbing at it now for the last few hours, and I'll get on my knees as well and join. Because when it comes to topics such as land and immigration, they are fundamental to any country and certainly fundamental to us here in the Virgin Islands. When I perused the proposed legislation, one of the key things that came to my attention was the question of whether what is proposed, is it equitable? What are the other agencies that fall within this scope? Which ones should be considered in the same vein? What is the current practice? What are the current privileges for some agencies, whether it's police or others? And what is reasonably to be expected for the immigration officers? And then, of course, if we're going to say immigration officers, we would have not too long ago received the Law Enforcement Review Review number 2, where the author, among the various things you may have criticized him for, he certainly put in something that we ourselves were thinking of. That is to say, the amalgamation of customs and immigration. So while the opportunity is here within this bill to address matters related to immigration officers and their welfare, we must not go beyond, I should say, looking at it for that group and see, well, who else falls in that category that must be addressed as well, which brings us to the point that Honorable Turnbull was making, this member for the 2nd District was making, that we must be clear about the financial implications of the measure and how far we can go. Because we must be able to, once we have put things into legislation, once we have created, as we would say in the accounting world, once we've created a liability, we must be able to be sure that we can, in fact, live up to it and meet the responsibilities as we have legislated. The question related to immigration, as we said, is critical to us in the Virgin Islands. And much of what has been said here this afternoon, I can associate with. Some members, I think was the Premier, brought up the question of assimilation, about whether or not, or how easy it was for persons to feel or become a part of the community. And as today we celebrated my cousin and neighbor for many years, Mrs. Esme Stout, the newest centenarian, she would have come up and lived in an age and time for much of her life where persons were very much welcomed into the territory, and because of the smaller numbers, in my view, felt the need or felt that they would fit in with the persons with whom they've met. It's a different age and a different stage now, where after some individuals have left the airport, they may not interact closely with another Virgin Islander for quite some time. They may not meet them at the food store. They may not meet them on the job. They may not meet them in many of the places that we may normally traverse. So the opportunity to assimilate into the community and the territory of the Virgin Islands is one that is missed by many individuals. And that's why, Madam Speaker, I'm proud to be associated with some activities that have been aimed at this assimilation in terms of ensuring the migration to the Virgin Islands is beneficial to us. And during my time at the Age Lively Stout Community College, I would have had opportunity to work as an administrator and support the Virgin Islands Studies program. And what always amazed me and showed me the power of information and knowledge is that a number of persons who are not from the Virgin Islands, some of them who had not even been in the Virgin Islands very long, when they opted to take the Virgin Islands history course at the Virgin Islands Studies Institute, they came away with greater knowledge of the Virgin Islands, sometimes more knowledge than many of us possess who have lived here all our lives, and came away with a greater appreciation for the road we traveled to get to where we are today. So, Madam Speaker, as we look towards the laws, we must also look towards those programs that are going to help to forge a united society, because as it is right now, Madam Speaker, we are here together. We must make decisions concerning rights and privileges, but we must realize that our economy has gone to a particular place that we will always need persons among us, and regardless of where those persons have come from, we do not want them living as separated from us, but understanding and feeling their part and their place in the Virgin Islands. To that end, I also would mention my association with the Virgin Islands Communal Association. The VICA, as they're known, they have also, as part of their program, promoting the development and knowledge of Virgin Islands culture, not just for Virgin Islanders, but as far as I understand it, when I joined, a part of it was towards helping others among us to understand and appreciate Virgin Islands culture as well. This bill, Madam Speaker, there are some particular issues in it that I would not speak of in this setting. I think we have an opportunity to I just need some questions answered that I believe we'd be able to answer in the committee stage to make sure, again, that what we're doing is something that we can stand up by and live up to. So, Madam Speaker, I look forward to us hastily moving on to the committee stage, of course, giving the privilege to all other members to speak as long as they wish, within reason, and we can do the work as we normally do in committee to ensure that the bill that is passed is one that is in the best interest of Virgin Islanders. Thank you.
Thank you. I recognize the at-large representative, Honorable Lorna Smith.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I assure the last speaker that I will be brief. As has been said many times for this afternoon, this is but a clean-up bill, cleaning up the Immigration and Passport Amendment Bill 2024. And there are just a few comments that I would like to make. Everybody has said that the whole issue of immigration is a very controversial one. Madam Speaker, I think we've been talking about it for too long. We do need to have a population policy for the British Virgin Islands. I believe it's one of the recommendations in the report of the Constitutional Commission for this year, but I hope it will be followed through very quickly, because that is the only way that we're going to be able to put a handle on our immigration policy. Certainly, Madam Speaker, we all know of persons, notwithstanding the section that, I think it's section 16, that corrects the 20 years. We do know that there are people who have been in the British Virgin Islands for upwards of 30 years and do not even have residence. So I am calling for priority to be given to a population policy. Madam Speaker, I certainly support the section 5A for immigration officers to receive hospital treatment and surgical attention and so on. And the cost of the treatment and attention is a charge on the consolidated fund. I'm reading what is here. What I am proposing, Madam Speaker, and I'm hoping we can sort it out at the committee stage, that we could put all high-risk officers, government high-risk officers, into one place, and that they be given the same treatment. Like the member for the second, I also am interested in what that cost could look like. And I'd like, Madam Speaker, to say to the Speaker that I do acknowledge when he makes his comments. I listen to him very soundly, and I always acknowledge your comments. But Madam Speaker, it is a very serious point. Hospital treatment and medical attention at government expense, and I want to reiterate that it should be for all high-risk officers in their line of duty. Section 16, we know that it has corrected that wrong of Section 16. It says the Principal Act is amended in Section 16(3)(c) by deleting the reference to the number 20 and substituting the number 10. That is very clear. I'm looking forward, Madam Speaker, to two other quick points. Section 6D, 6D, which talks about the period of time that you can, that a person who I believe is applying for belonger status, I believe that's what it's referring to, should not exceed 90 days. I'm looking forward to that discussion. As well, I am looking forward to the discussion in relation to conditional permits. I know this is a very narrow section of the law, this a very narrow amendment, but I hope that there is an opportunity during the committee stage for us to discuss this matter more broadly, because I do think that there is a lot of discretion that is given to officers or the chief immigration officer in relation to conditional permits, and we have to have a policy in terms of how it's used. Finally, Madam Speaker, and I have been debating whether I should say this or not, there's been a lot of discussion in this House from last week. There was discussions about lineage. There was a discussion today about nationalism or nationals versus patriots or patriotism. I cannot claim any lineage in terms of the BVI, nor do I wish to claim it. I do not know, Madam Speaker, whether I would qualify as a national. But, Madam Speaker, what I do know is that I am a patriot of this country. And the mention was made by the Premier first, and I believe the Deputy Premier brought it up. And he brought it up in the context of all 13 of us speaking with one accord on certain matters. And I believe, I'm not just saying that I am a patriot, I believe that all 13 of us in this House are patriots. And I hope that we will continue to move forward as patriots of the British Virgin Islands. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. I recognize the Minister for Communications and Works, Honorable Kai Reimer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, before I get into the debate, I just want to acknowledge the birthday blessings that were given to me on this special day. I think it's a reason I'm here working in the House of Assembly, so that I can publicly say a general thank you to all the persons that wish me happy birthday. So I am appreciative, and I also acknowledge my sister who made my younger sister who made her birthday today as well as Miss Muddy, who is now a centenarian, and I grew up knowing her, and she grew up knowing me, and those were the days when the community raised us. And her mind is still strong, and I just want to acknowledge her and her family who have worked so hard to keep her as she is today. So I just want to make those acknowledgements. And Madam Speaker, I thank you for that quick time to mention that. And all my colleagues who also wish me happy birthday as well. But as we're here speaking about the Immigration and Passport Amendment Bill 2025, a lot has been said already in terms of it being a cleanup bill. I think the House of Assembly, that is what we do. We always come back at some point to make some amendment to something that was missed. But we know the importance of modernizing these bills, and especially this immigration bill. It speaks to the policies here in the Virgin Islands. And we refer to back in the 60s, 70s, when there was an influx of population growth, and that influx, we had quite a lot that came from the Caribbean as well. I think now we have over 100 different nationalities living here. So it just speaks to the importance of immigration. And, with that influx of people coming into any territory, there would be challenges, there would be opportunities. We know about the demographic shift. We also recognize that there will be social tensions. And obviously there would be strain on certain infrastructure as well. And I can speak clearly to that in terms of the infrastructural challenges. But we need for effective management that would also foster community cohesion when you have an influx of people into your territory. So we know the current role right now of the immigration and the role that it plays, especially a community where we speak about tourism and we speak about hospitality, and knowing tourism is one of our economic drivers. We understand how important the immigration role is when it comes to our tourism. And before I get into the bill, we just need to speak about how important immigration is and how we should make sure that it's on the cutting edge of technology as we're a traveling community, and we see what is happening when you enter different communities, how important immigration is, and how we need to modernize our systems here in our territory as well. Yes, we understand that there's a security issue, and we must understand how sensitive a matter that would be. But we should also embrace the technology. When you travel to different jurisdictions, you know that you show your passport, you take a picture, the documents are there, and you go through. I know we're moving towards modernizing, and I acknowledge the chief and her team. We now have an electronic acting chief, and we're hoping that they come out of Hollywood soon. But we're modernized a little bit where we have now an electronic system that you don't need to fill the paper and fill out this paper anymore, and I acknowledge them. But we need to go further. I think we need to get away from even that ED card. And once you're on a plane or the boat, your information would be sent forward, and you'll be able to then do your monitoring from there. But we understand the sensitivity of that, and we acknowledge the team, as I say, for their work, and they should also understand the impacts that this have on the economy and the social issues as well. So, Madam Speaker, in terms of the bill, I would just briefly speak about the ordinarily resident, and I appreciate that being within the bill, and it brings some uniformity to the immigration laws. But I just want for us to consider a small fraction of the bill where you may have a person who would have probably grown up in our community, wasn't born here, grown up, went to school, and they've gone away to study abroad, maybe for 4 years, get their degree, and is ready to come back. I think there has been some issues where those persons lose their eligibility, and I'm not sure how that would tie in to being an ordinary resident. Maybe some provision could be inserted into the law that speaks to maybe a student studying abroad, or something where that time would also be recognized, or something to that effect. Because we have quite a lot of those persons that fall into that category. So maybe something like that should be considered. I'm not sure how possible that would be. Madam Speaker, the support for immigration officers, I too support the provision for the medical treatment. I know members would have spoken about all persons who work on the front line. I'm sure legislation by legislation that would be addressed, and we would be able to standardize that those persons would be able to get the same sort of treatment in terms of their medical expense, and as we acknowledge the risk and their contribution as well. But we must also make sure that it's a process that is clear, as we consider the abuse with a certain sort of privilege as well. I move on to the streamlining of the residency requirement. That is something, as other members have spoken about, that is something that was just a policy, but now it's being mandated now in this legislation. What I also want to speak to about, Madam Speaker, is, as I mentioned earlier, the influx of, as we thrive on tourism, I want there to be where the immigration system supports also the needs of the businesses and within our community, and also the visitor satisfaction when they come through those services. I think now I flew in recently, and I must say that the process has been a bit more efficient, and you would hear, even on the plane coming, some of the persons were like, I'm hoping that there's not another plane on the runway because we may have to wait for quite some time. And I think that has been another issue where we have boaters coming in and they spend quite a lot of time going through the process. So again, this just speaks to us modernizing and using technology in terms of those services, as we want to make sure that the person coming into a territory have a good experience, as the immigration officer is the first person that they encounter once they come into the territory. So I foresee that there needs to be continuous training and I guess interaction with the persons coming in, so that we can understand what their concerns are, how efficient the process can be, and make sure that it's something that they are indeed happy about, while we make sure that the persons coming in are quite vetted and they're safe coming into our territory. So I wouldn't rehash a lot that has been said already, but I just want to, again, add my support to this amendment, and understand that it's not just merely a legal adjustment, but this is an opportunity for us to fix some of the issues that we would have identified. And before I sit, Madam Speaker, I just want to reference something that my colleague from the 2nd District spoke about. I'm not sure if I heard it right, but I'll give him the opportunity to speak about it, because I think I heard him mention that if we didn't allow the expats into the territory, the BVI would be a slum. I think that's what caught my attention there, and it's only fair that I allow him. I'm not sure if that's possible to just address that, because I can't understand what he meant by that. I was actually walking back from a board meeting, and I was listening. I was like, what is my cousin saying? So I think if there's any possibility that he clear that up, I think that needs some sort of clarity, because I'm not sure if that's what he meant, but if he meant that, I got to check his temperature, make sure that he was speaking correctly.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker,
What point are you raising on?
I'm raising a point of clarification and information, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I want to first say to the Honorable Minister that I think your understanding of what you heard and what I said was incorrect.
That's what you're raising.
Yes, that's what I'm raising. To clarify it, Madam Speaker, I was giving reference to a discussion that was had when I first returned to the BVI, and the discussion was for who from here and who not from here should be sent back home, and all the people that are not from the BVI, all the expatriates from the BVI should be sent back home. And that is where I stood on the point and said that I feel that if the persons who are not from the BVI, if they are returned back home, the BVI will become a slum. So I was hoping that the minister now understands the point that I made, And I'm not sure why you're walking away from a board meeting when your first call should be to the House. But I understand it's your birthday.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm not sure if he cleared it up enough, but he tried to do something there, and I appreciate him trying to clarify what he said, and I appreciate that, Madam Speaker. But I just want to say I support this amendment, and Madam Speaker, the importance of these legislation, and as we go through the committee stage, I am sure that we would address any concern that may arise. But I am happy to see that, you know, the officers of the immigration department now has a level of comfort as they go through, as they work and they carry out their duties. Because I recall vaguely, I'm not sure if this was discussed, where we had an officer that passed and it took him quite some time back and forth, where we were unable to give him assistance, whereas in a different department, that is something that is automatic. So I'm happy that this is now explicit in this legislation, where officers who would have served and risked their lives in these capacities are now, the government would be able to address those persons that would have passed. So, Madam Speaker, I thank you for this opportunity to make my contribution.
Thank you. I call on the Premier to wrap up.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, some members seem, I guess, genuinely perplexed at why we were having a kind of broader discussion. But I think it's important for the members of the public to understand what it is we're seeking to achieve in the overall scope of things. And it is correct that this bill is a bill that is correcting some issues from when this issue was debated before. But as some other members have said, the matters of immigration remain topical and relevant. And while we had a debate before, I think it's important for us to remind persons of what we're seeking to achieve. And remind persons that indeed we want to build a unified nation. And let's not forget that, especially as it pertains to some of the talk that has happened in the last few weeks, even originating from the House of Assembly. We have to, as leaders, reassure the public that we are not party to a divisive game that will ultimately destroy the Virgin Islands if we keep it up. And we have to remind persons what we're seeking to achieve. As I said before, I believe that we must all stand up and be patriots. I won't speak for anybody else. I'll speak for myself. I'm a patriot of the Virgin Islands. And then, as I said, patriotism is measured in service, and it's measured in your actions, as well as your words. Let's not discount words. Words are important. And I welcome the very clear affirmative statements by persons like Honorable Lorna Smith. I can say to you that I certainly recognize Honorable Smith as a patriot, and one of the greatest patriots, I would say, of these Virgin Islands. Some persons were upset at me that I invited Honorable Smith to my government on the basis of the fact that she doesn't have ancestry. But it's not something that I even hesitate about, because of all that Honorable Smith has done for the Virgin Islands, that I will never discount in any way, shape, or form. And And it's an excellent example that you do not have to have ancestry in the Virgin Islands to be a patriot. It has to do with fighting for the collective. And I think it's a powerful statement for those persons who do not have ancestry, but you wouldn't notice based on how they fight. That's what we're trying to build here in the Virgin Islands, Madam Speaker. And I know persons have suspicion as to whether politicians are using whether you have ancestry or whether you don't for some kind of political advantage or motive. I don't think that's smart politics. My view. I think everybody loses when it comes to that. You know, my district is a district full of persons who have been granted status and who don't have ancestry. And also some very proud and very, I would just say very proud Virgin Islanders who are very serious about their ancestry. It makes no sense for me to try to engage in that form of politics. I think that's ultimately very destructive and it doesn't help us in any way. But we do have to have a mature conversation. I want to also recognize the members for, of course, dealing with the details of the bill, which, of course, we have to deal with in committee. And as I anticipated, many members made reference to Section 3 amended of the bill. I'm sorry, Clause 3 of the bill, and which amends, I believe, Section 5. And I think that will generate some good discussion in terms of cost, sustainability. Just for persons to know, it's nearly exactly the same language in the Police Act. But I know, of course, that there are concerns as it pertains to national health insurance. As a member for the 2nd District brought that up. And I think it's a discussion we have to have in committee to hash it out to make sure what we're doing is sustainable. Because as members have rightly said, it needs to be extended to our law enforcement agencies. And the question is how sustainable is it in terms of the language with which it's written. But one thing I can say for certain, Madam Speaker, is that we can have some law enforcement agencies having certain privileges and others not. All of the law enforcement agencies must be treated equally, and some shouldn't be treated like stepchildren. So we must have some uniformity across the board. I take the points by the boy Honorable Reimer in terms of ways in which we have to improve the immigration process. I certainly take that point. And that is something that we have to ensure that we focus on intently as we seek to build our economy, and the importance of the immigration officers in doing that. And of course, the importance of the immigration officers in terms of law enforcement. That is extremely important. And we're going to be speaking more about that, especially on the law enforcement side, considering the review which has been done and the government's response to it. I don't have much more to say, Madam Speaker, except to say, of course, Leader of the Opposition brought up a point that I just want to respond to, speaking about the Virgin Islands Party government giving status to persons' spouses and things like that. Not quite sure who he was referring to, but I challenge the Leader of the Opposition or anyone to point to an individual who received belonger status who is not legally entitled to it. And Madam Speaker, we should also acknowledge that the process, there is a process for the revocation of belonger status if it was it was given and it was not deserved. Yeah, and I was reminded, Madam Speaker, that something happened, under a previous administration. It us members of financial services and other persons in the community, etc. So that should be reminded, but it's no need for us to rehash any of that right now. A lot of things used to happen in the past that we are seeking to correct right now and to make sure that we have a process which is transparent, a process which upholds the law as we are seeking to do right now. And I think Honorable Penn was articulate when he spoke about the fact that persons need certainty. They need certainty. We need a process which is fair. We need a process which is transparent. And really that is what we're seeking to do. There's no need for us to try to rehash the past or what one government did or another government did. The point is we're here to fix all of those issues now. Also, Madam Speaker, my honorable colleague from the second district did make a statement that I think some persons received it negatively. I think Honorable Reimer just thought he would provide an opportunity for that to be cleaned up a little bit. But I would say let's be careful, and I kind of started out with that, statements that could offend persons, and I think some persons would have taken that as offensive. And so we just have to be very careful in how we express. I think I understand what the member was seeking to express. I don't think there was ill intent, but certainly, if to say expatriates go home, we turn into a slum, Virgin Islanders might find that to be offensive. And so perhaps maybe there's still opportunity just to say, well, certainly it's not the impression that we want to give.
Madam Speaker, again, I rise on a point of information, and I am going to say what I said before, and I'm going to say it, hopefully this third time with a little bit more clarity. Madam Speaker, if we send home the discussion back in 2007, and this discussion I made, I am a proud Virgin Islander. Almost 11 generations of the plantation. What I am saying is, at that time the discussion was, if we send home all expatriates, meaning, Madam Speaker, we will be sending home families and husbands and wives of children who are not quote-unquote indigenous. We will have a Virgin Islands that we don't recognize and which will become a sub. That's what I said. Because the point is, Madam Speaker, that I was raising in the beginning of my statement is that we are indeed stronger together. We are stronger when we're unified. We're stronger when we work together. But this divide that we continue to have, and that's the discussion that was being had at the time at my job, it was this divisiveness amongst ourselves, our brothers and sisters from the Caribbean. We are stronger together. We are stronger as a Virgin Islands people together. We're stronger when my foreparents went to the Caribbean and sent home money to build their families. That's the strength that I'm talking about, Madam Speaker.
Yes, Madam Speaker. I ain't sure if that fix it. I ain't sure if that fix it, Madam Speaker, but let me just leave it there. I'll just leave it there. Madam Speaker, well, let me just say it this way. We're not going to send anyone who's, let me just say that, all expatriates home or anything like that. So That's not going to happen. But what we do want to do is we want to have a process by which persons who are expatriates and are making a valuable contribution to the society, that they have a clear process to become belongers. And of course, we also want to attract persons who have gone away, whether they're working abroad or they're studying abroad, to come back and be able to make a meaningful contribution, whether they come back immediately or whether they come back after some years of working. And Madam Speaker, it is true, and this is a part of the Virgin Islands story, and it's one that I don't shy away from at all. You know, we speak about this relationship we have with the Dominican Republic, special relationship, places like Consuelo and places like that, where we have, Macaris, and San Pedro, where a lot of our ancestors, mine included, went to the Dominican Republic to work, whether it's sugarcane factories, etc. And of course, we have, they went over there, they had children over there, they had families over there. Some of those persons have come to the Virgin Islands to meet their cousins, etc. And that's a part of our history. I've heard about Virgin Islanders going to Cuba and other places like that. And that is a part of the Virgin Islands story. And persons will always travel for better economic opportunities. And some of those persons, they'll travel and they'll remain a part of the countries that they travel to. Some persons will return home, like many persons return home to the Virgin Islands. So that is a part of the Virgin Islands story. It's nothing to be ashamed of. Madam Speaker, I think we've said enough about this particular bill, but we will be having discussions with the community and educating the community, just like Honorable Penn said. So persons can be educated about what the process looks like, a clear, transparent process, and things will change. I have to give assurance, Madam Speaker, that persons, and this is something I'm going to clarify in the committee stage, persons who've applied under the old rules, they should be judged based on the old rules. That's something I'm sure we can exchange with the legal minds about. But all the new applications, they're new rules. And this law will come into force pretty quickly. And of course, we have to do some level of sensitization and education with the public to ensure that everyone understands what the law is and what is expected of them. Madam Speaker, I want to thank the members of the House for their contribution. I look forward to going through this bill in committee stage. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the bill shortly entitled Immigration and Passport Amendment Bill 2025 be now read a second time. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. I call upon the clerk to read the bill a second time.
This bill shall be cited as the Immigration and Passport Amendment Bill 2025.
Pursuant to Standing Order 55-1 of the House of Assembly of the Virgin Islands, the bill now stands committed to a committee of the whole House to consider it clause by clause. House is now in committee.